Good morning, everyone. I think we're ready to start the readers panel. I'd like to introduce the moderator and the person who's put together the questions. This is Linda Walls. She is a breeder, rider, and competitor of Dutch warm bloods. I've known Linda for a lot of years. She is the principal of Step Ahead Knowledge Acquisitions. She has over 23 years of marketing experience and research expertise. She plans and conducts marketing projects, designs mathematical and statistical models, forecasting, and develops marketing database. So yes, Linda is knowledgeable in what she's doing. She's a good motivator, and she does this for a living. So she will make the panel work. So thank you, Ian, and I'll give the mic to Linda.
Thank you, Anna. So welcome everyone today. So what we're going to do is first have our wonderful panelists talk a little bit about what they think in terms of their decisions to breed, and then how they evaluate their breeding and how that comes back in terms of finding those buyers, because let's face it, it's business, right? What? Or it's a keepsake for the business side. So at first, we're going to go pretty much through the panel and have them do a lot of talking. While we're doing that, if you come up with some questions, just jot them down on the notepad in front of you. And if you want it asked to a specific panelist, please put that on, because we did leave a full half hour. We may have more time at the end to ask additional questions. So we'll wrap back around that way in order to keep things flowing and have the discussion. So for those of you who have never been to a focus group, this is basically how it works. I ask questions, they answer. and people usually sit in the back room behind a one-way mirror and get to watch. But you guys get to watch live, because we're all friends here. And I will pass the microphone around so that you can hear them as they answer the questions, so that we don't miss any of their wonderful information. But we'll get them talking by as if you didn't know them, but just be sure you know them. Each of them will give us their name, their breeding direction, the number of KWPN-NA horses they breed each year, and if they have any KWPN stallions, and any Prestate or Preferant mares that they'd like to mention. And who would like to start?
Oh, I don't know that. All right, my name is Bill Duffy. I harness horses. I actually am a farrier by trade. This is a wildly out of control hobby of mine. We have two harness stallions. One is in this country, Athlete. He's a Curse stallion we imported in 2021. And then we have another harness stallion in the Netherlands, Macho. He got approved in 2020. He's still over there competing and breeding. Breed, and it varies. We have a small herd of mares. Maybe we have 3 to 4 we breed every year. This year we've only got 2 coming. We kept some open to do iBox and things like that. I'm talking to you because you haven't talked to. So we just built the new facility in Ashland, Massachusetts, and I think that's about it.
Okay, I'm Lisa Dickman, and I breed for dressage. I've been breeding since my first foal was in 2019. 2019 was my first foal. I breed 1 to 4 foals a year, and no, I have no stallions, only mares, and yeah.
Welcome, Lisa. Thanks.
My name is Josh Albrecht. I do gelders. We're working on building our program we bought out Deborah Harrison's breeding program for the most part. So I believe we have 2 Prestate mares from her, and then we imported a young stallion, and our full number varies because I'm kind of playing with all those mares and we've been like starting some of them and getting them ready to potentially do iBox or riding them. So last year we had 14 foals. This year we'll have 6, and next year between 14 to 18.
Welcome, Josh. Thanks.
Morning, my name is Jens Richter. I have, I don't know, like 135 stallions. They're not really mine, but I have them in the tank and I have so much semen I'm selling and stuff. So yeah, I'm breeding myself too. I have actually horses in Germany I'm still breeding. And that's more like a hobby because I never really see them and stuff. And that's dressage horses. But I also like the jumpers a lot. And I have a lot of clients, they ask me what they should do and how should they breed. And so I get a lot of those questions. And so I try to help them find a good match for their mares. And that's kind of like my business. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
You support us with
And I support you guys, yes.
Yeah.
Jens, why don't you say your company name, please?
My business is Global Equine Sires, and I've been doing this probably since 2011. And I started really small, just for private clients. And so they asked me if I can help them bring some stallions here. And so I started buying more semen at the same time and putting it in stock. And now I have, I don't know, a lot.
Hi, I'm Carly Fisher. I have my home is outside Boston, Massachusetts. I think my first one was in 2013. I got into breeding because my real job is being a trainer. And after I had my son, I couldn't go on the road for 20 years or 20 weeks out of the year. I do hunters and jumpers. I have some dressage mares. I don't have any super predicated ones. Most of my mares are young.
We're on the way.
Yeah, they're gonna get them when I ride them.
Okay, my name is Wim Casimir. Hopefully no one by now. Yeah, I live in Spencerville. My breeding program is Dutch harness. Direction is Dutch harness. So breed normally like try to breed four mares a year. So hopefully every year 4 foals. Got 3 coming this year. One straight mare didn't catch. So yeah, I'm the lucky. I started in Holland, my breeding program. I have one of those mares out of the same damn lines I brought over before I even moved to the US. She was here and gladly she never sold. She's probably my best brood mare in the barn. Yeah, focus. I got 2 stallions approved in Holland, homebred stallions, colonists in Indiana. And out of 2 mares I used to own in the Netherlands, I sold them in full. And out of those 2 mares, they got 2 KWPN-NA licensed stallions like J-Lead and In Time. So, yeah.
I'm Tracy Geller. I live in southeastern Virginia, Wisconsin, but it's way too much snow for me now. I breed hunter jumper, and I'm just starting to maybe get into eventing horses just because that's what's in my area. I have 10 mares. I don't breed them. I think we decided after we had 5 foals, that was too many. So I think 1 to 4. And the mares that I do have some mares that got their cur predicates this year. Some are ones that I bred, and then some are that were sport mares that I acquired from other people. So yeah.
I think I'm good, Tracy. Thanks. My name is Scott Tolman. I live in Spofford, New Hampshire, which is in the southwest corner of the state. I've been doing this a long time. I was trying to figure out just how many years and how many meetings I've been at, but I think we imported our first Dutch warm blood in the previous I year, not the most recent I year, but Icknaat was our very first Dutch warm blood. We imported him as a 2-year-old. I've been going to Currings since, and our first fall crop was the K year, and not the most recent K year, but K year before that. So yeah, it's been a long time. We have 4 stallions. We have a Gelder stallion, we have a harness stallion, we have 2 dressage stallions. We primarily breed dressage, although I love the Dutch harness horses, and I co-own a couple jumper stallion prospects and 1 jumper mare, so we do a little bit of everything, but it's primarily dressage. We have, between here and the Netherlands, because we have about an equal number of horses in the Netherlands as we do in the US. We have about a dozen foals a year, something like that. give or take. We've had a number of preferent and Prestati mares over the years, and probably the most important one is our foundation mare. Her name is Orcus. She had a breeding index of 196, which I think is the highest breeding index of any mare ever in North America. And now we have a number of her daughters and granddaughters and great granddaughters. We've had 3 mares at the National Mare Show, including one that won in Holland. So we've been doing this a long time.
You're right. Oh, that. I don't really need to because he said everything for us basically. But I think we got our first harness mare in 2011. Oh, I forgot about her. That's why he's here. But I'm a dressage trainer, but I've definitely gotten hooked on the harness horses. So we do a lot of the breeding and the matchmaking together and keep it all going. But he pretty much covered all of our horses and what we do. So I'm done. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it. So now we'll get into a little bit about your decisions to breed and how we make those decisions. So first off, if we can just talk a little bit about why KWPN horses and your particular direction. Some of you have already mentioned it, so you don't have to repeat it. And if there's any in setting goals, how do you set your goals? What do you do in setting those goals? What are your thoughts? And you don't have to go around in circles. So who wants to go first? Well, I make volunteers, but all right.
Goals and, well, so I guess.
How do you make goals and why?
So the direction I started with when I was younger, we had Morgans. We actually had Lippet Morgans. And then they weren't quite fancy enough for us. So we went to hacking horses. And then, I don't know, it was probably 2005 or 6, I started kind of taking notice of the harness horses coming over. And I actually went down to Pennsylvania to a recently imported stallion. His name was Tango. He was a Yonker son. That was the first harness horse I ever laid eyes on. And I was just blown away. I mean, the presence, the power, the natural ability. I was probably late teens when at that point, and I just knew I'm breeding these horses. I'm going to have these horses. I haven't looked back since. So that's kind of the progression for me. Breeding goals, every breeder wants to breed a licensed stallion or top foals, current champions. It's just trying to breed quality foals like everybody else. The harness market's fairly small. So we really try to be kind of extra selective because, only the really top foals are the ones that people want because, again, it's a small market. So kind of an average harness foal isn't worth, a good harness foal isn't worth a whole lot, but an average one really isn't. So we really try to be selective. And there's been years where, a certain cross on a mare that wasn't working out. And, we could have bred this, maybe we were trying to use frozen or, we could use chilled with something different. But, again, if it's not what I want, I don't do it, period. I'd rather leave the mare open than just put a foal on the ground that I'm not really excited about. That's kind of where I started. I like to breed, frankly, for what I like. I hope other people like it as well. But I try to kind of stay true to the Dutch, the breeding platform that has worked so well for all these years. There's an inbreeding problem a little bit with the harness horses. So I do try to take that into consideration. And, I always say outcrosses aren't difficult, but good ones are. So that's something I try to think about when I'm breeding as well.
That brings up a good question. If you're thinking about being that specific, are you thinking traits, performance, genealogy? What's more important? Those three.
I guess it's a combination of all of them. I am trying to breed a fine harness show horse, and that's a very specific, very narrow market. And of course, we all have. How many times do you breed a mare and have a picture of what that foal's going to look like, and it comes out looking like nothing like you thought it was, So again, it's all a crapshoot, it's all a gamble, but we just try to do as much research and know your lines and know your mares and, have good dam lines and good producing stallions. And every once in a while you do take a stallion that's a little bit of an outcross and hopefully it works and sometimes it doesn't. And, so that's a little bit of something you need to consider, especially with the harness horses where the inbreeding problem, is starting to be a problem. And it's hard because a lot of the champion foals and champion horses have a high kinship dependence. So you almost have to, think about, do you want to maybe take a little step back in quality to get the kinship lower, or do you want to breed a champion for that year? And it's definitely something you can kind of depends on the mare. If you have, if you have a mare with a little bit interesting pedigree that could really produce something that's an outcross, well, maybe I try something a little different on the stallion side. So yeah, it's a case by case situation, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely something to consider, case by case. So,
Thank you.
who's next? We go with this one?
We've gone in circles. I'm gonna start the circle of different places.
Oh boy, it's gonna switch it up.
I thought of another one. Thank you, Lisa, go for it.
Okay, so I had my first, we were living in Hawaii at the time. I imported my first Dutch warm blood horse in I don't know, 1996. And I
Just hold the microphone in front of your mouth.
well closer. Okay, so I had my first Dutch warm blood in 1996. He was my first introduction to Dutch warm bloods, and I just was always impressed with the health of him. He was just always sound. I think he died at 27. So when I did dressage, and I stumbled across a breeder, Siggy Bill, and she introduced me to breeding, and she introduced me to the Dutch horses she had. And since I had a love for the health and the quality of the Dutch horses, that it just kind of was a no-brainer. Moved into buying a couple brood mares from her as young horses, and started breeding myself. So that is the thing I like the best about the Dutch horses is I do like the quality of the horse, the health of the horse. I like how they really, it's important to them. It's important that the horses are good in sport and stay healthy through their life in sport. So I try to stay true to that. And so as far as what I breed and what I breed for, I don't have the facilities for a stallion. So breeding for a stallion has never been on my mind. But what I try to breed for is a better mare. And I think that when you keep that in mind, and then that factors into, okay, I have a good mare. How do I want to make her better or have another quality mare? So that's when I try to factor in things like pedigree and sport and how I want to have the future of my program to go. And in that comes some quality offspring that turn into riding horses as well. So my goal has always been to breed a better mare for myself.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
So I got into the KWPN horses. I'm going to fully blame my coach for that. She is Dutch, and when I wanted to get a actual dressage horse instead of an off the track thoroughbred, she pretty much said you have to get a Dutch horse. So I did. No, she's not. She's teaching. She should be here. She's too busy teaching. And then after my first Dutch horses, which were from DG Bar, and they're amazing. So I guess I could run Willie too. I got a couple of horses from more of the German stud book, and it was like, no, I don't like these. They're not. I like theirs. Well, it was like when you looked at the German horses, they had a lot to offer. But I was like, where are the German horses that have the forehand and the power that the Dutch horses have? And where do I find those? And you don't. So at least from what I've seen. So that would be why so that's why I went with the Dutch horses. I just love them. And then in the breeding directions, they have the various different breeding directions. And so for me, I like the directions and also the ability that we can pull from the other directions for new blood or things to add. So not that I'm saying all of them need to be a mix of the different breeding directions, but you have an inbreeding problem in any one of the directions, you can pull from another breeding direction more so than in some of the other stud books, I feel like, to kind of increase certain traits and things like that. And then through the horses from Deborah Harrison, we got into the gelders, and I really like the power and substance that they have in them, as well as the soundness and longevity. For the way we raise our horses, they fit better into our program, and then they also fit for what I want for myself to ride. So that's kind of going there. With our foals, you can't make everyone happy. So I just set 2 goals for every foal that's born. I hope that I will like it and that it's better than its mother in the trait that I chose to fix. It might decrease in certain ways, but I picked a trait from the mare. We need to fix this trait. The foal comes out and I like it and that trait's better. I'm happy with that and I might change for future, but those are the goals that I'm working with for now. Because my thought is hopefully all the foals sell. But if they don't, it's a lot nicer to go out to the barn and be looking at these foals that didn't sell that you love versus one of you. Because my thought is if I breed it for somebody else and then they don't buy it, now I'm stuck with it. So I want to like every single foal that's born. So that's kind of my #1 goal. Every foal that's born I like, and it's something that I would be willing to ride because I do a lot of riding and training. So that's something that I want to look at and I want to ride.
Excellent. Thank you for being so specific, Dan.
Yeah, I have to agree on your, not with the German horse thing, but since the Dutch horses are like really based on Holsteiners in the beginning too. So, yeah, we basically have, I think the horses narrow down a lot now. When you see horses out in the dressage ring, you can hardly see, is this a Holsteiner, is this a Dutch horse, is this they really like kind of have the same look, and also and I'm glad that the Dutch and the Germans are so open with their breedings that you can actually use a lot of genetics from other breeding organizations. And as we can see, and Scott probably agrees with that, you can see in the stallion parade in Holland that you have a lot of German influence in the horses. And I like those horses. They look very modern, super nice temperaments, good to ride. And that's, I think, a breeding goal of mine too. I'm not really specifically say I want to breed an Olympic horse. It's not really, I mean, that's, if it ends up being, that's okay. But I think I want to breed a horse that's very usable for people, for a lot of people, and different. Somebody wants to ride with pleasure and they're happy to go out on trails for 10 hours, that's fine, if they're happy with the horse. If they want to ride dressage, they can ride dressage. A good jumper should be a good dressage horse as well in a way, rideable, and have fun to ride and hack and not just jump the whole time. So I like the idea of breeding a horse that's really usable for a lot of people, and they can then go the direction they want to go. Because we're still breeding for pleasure horses, basically for people to buy, and I'm not really in the market to sell them to all the Olympic riders. And it's kind of hard to get into that market anyways. They have their own ideas of where they buy the horses, and there's actually a difference between the Europeans and the Americans. Like Stefan, he has his horses made and he buys them, and then he goes to the Olympics with all different kind of horses. So to make a horse go nicely, you have to have, first of all, a good a good broodmare with, like he said, good traits, and then you start from there. You don't want to start with a mare that has all those mistakes already and you're trying to fix mistakes. You want to, fix this and fix this and fix this. That takes forever. That takes generations to breed out. So start with a really good mare, and then you try to increase certain traits you want to make better and find the right stallion. So that's my opinion about my breeding. So so far it worked out good. The people are happy to buy horses, and for me, on the end, I want to see them having the horses for 20 years, like you'll have yours, because I like my horses and I don't want them ending up somewhere in in bad hands. So that's kind of like how I shows my clients too a little bit.
So as a trainer and a rider, I spent, 10 or 15 years, riding 10 or 12 horses a day. I lived on both coasts. I grew up in the Midwest. So, I had a lot of experience on a lot of horses. Back in the early 2000s, we didn't always know the pedigrees, but they put brands on all of them. So you might not know what you were riding, but you knew where it came from. And I'm sorry, but I didn't like the German horses because I grew up riding thoroughbreds, and they had some get up and go to them, and especially with the Hanoverians, like you got to spur a lot. And I was like, okay, I don't like that. The Dutch horses tended to be a little bit hotter. If I got to jump a big jump, it's got to go down to it. So the KWPN horses stuck out to me there. And then I worked for Shelley Campbell was out here for a little bit in the early 2000s.
And then I stumbled across Kathy Hickerson at Equine Affairs. So that's how I kind of got into the Dutch, like knowing the system and everything. I like the system. I like that it's open and you can use whatever mares I want to, or whatever mares, whatever stallions I want to use. I can be in one space. And my goals are to breed a horse that either I want to ride or I'm going to sell to my customers. I am a terrible salesperson. So if I go to the horse show and it's a nice horse and I want to ride it and I like it, people are going to come up to me and want to buy it. And so that's, what I want to have. Anything that I want in my barn, people are going to want in their barn. The mares are big to me. I don't have a huge amount of money to spend on them, so I got a lot of young ones. But I was real specific about what was in the dam lines, figuring that if, that depth in the dam line was there, that the mare was probably quality.
For me, it's a little obvious of normal. I mean, growing up in the Netherlands, I mean, it's just a total different thing as over here. There's more freedom. You can breed a horse and you can still keep it at home or take it to shows. But racing horses in the Netherlands, that means when you have a full board, you can decide to take it through an inspection occurring. But at least when it turns 3 and you want to continue using that horse for the breeding program, yeah, you got to take it to an inspection. So for me, growing up in Holland, was just a way of life. Otherwise, you're going to stay behind with your breeding program. And so that's for me. And for me, I'm a mare person. I'm more a mare person as a stallion person. I'm standing stallion, but I'm still I put my 2 horses more like I'm more like a person for I'm really focused on good mare lines. What has a history, has performance in it, and suppleness, and also courage for that harness. That's a big thing too. It's actually for every direction. It's important. A horse has a lot of courage when it goes in the ring. It's a big heart. And soundness in athleticism. You want to, where you had back in the days, we had the best harness horses. They were kind of more the stallions. They are the horses. They came. We locked them up for a week in the dark stall, and then they took them to the currings and they throw the tail in the air. That's what it was. But now we updated, we moderned that program so much. So that means also you have to adjust your training. So now we can almost train them like they're so athletic. So that means you have to work yourself also into it, fine tune yourself more in presenting. So and that's fun. And the Dutch harness breed, I think, has been a really successful, become a really successful sport horse in different disciplines. So over here, there's a huge market for dressage, and I'm still selling. People come to me, I'm just honest, we don't breed, we don't select on canter. We do select on walk and trot, show trot. But canter is still, but I believe still, I've seen them a lot of breeders, find them a lot in our area. If they have, an athletic body, sport body, they'll be able to do a good canter. But I mean, it's still not. We don't. There's never going to be a part of a selection process. So that is just our, does that individual horse have that specific gift? So just a bonus. Yeah. So yeah. But over here, it's it's fun to still take them to the currents. It still does for me as a breeding to keep my breeding program on a certain level. You gotta take them in. You gotta compete to other horses to see where you are. I mean, at home we can say, okay, we all got the best, but take them to a show, take them to a curring, and prove yourself. And also judge your horses. Don't be, mine is champion and the neighbor's champion. And no, I'm pretty tough on my own horses. If I don't like them, I sell them, or at least, I'm not taking them to that specific direction to what I think it was bred for. Same as what Bill said. Sometimes you have high hopes and it just doesn't turn out that well. So you got to know your mares. Got to see what is good on the mare and what can do the stallion on make it a little better. So, and I think with a good dam line, I still believe is a good dam line is 75% of your offspring. That stamps it. So.
Why did you move here? That's a big change.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely. Well, Judy asked why was the reason I moved here. So yeah, doing business with North America started like 23 years ago. We had a lot of interest in the Dutch harness horses from, by that time, the Arabian industry. They saw videos and there was some big hotshot Arabian trainers, breeders out of Kentucky. They start knocking on our door because they saw where it went wrong with the Arabians. The Arabians only became prettier and less powerful. And they thought, they saw the power from the Dutch harness horses and they thought, we need some of that to make our horse better. And so that went on for like 3 years. That kind of slowed down a little bit, but in those 3 years, they imported 100, 200 plus horses. Yeah, and it went on for really good, and then it kind of. But that's also, you know, if you've probably all seen Arabians more than I have. But you know, you got those 15 two-hand horses, really pretty, and then all of a sudden they fly in like a 17-hand Dutch harness. And they have to bring that to, you know, they just, oh, that's very impressive. So a lot of them got a little scared, I guess. And we train them different too. You know, we train them like dressage horses, make them supple. And that is, I think, the biggest thing where it went wrong. The different styles and training, you know, with the show culture. You know, when you go here to shows and you're like, it's all a little bit based to me, you know, with the saddlebred style, with all the fake stuff, you know, with all the, you know, the chains and the bunches, you know, they just the firecrackers, whatever they use. I mean, we don't do that crap with Dutch harness. So we just want to have it with heart and courage and the right training that keeps your horse. That's why we can show horses 20 times in the summer. Every weekend again, in some classes we go in 3 times a day with the same horse, and after maybe the last class it's his best performance. And you know, I can see that as over here. That's not with breeds what are, you know, born over here, the saddlebreds and the Arabians and the Morgans. They don't have the power and the stamina. Yeah. But anyway, coming back to your question about why I moved, I always, when I came here after that, right. Yeah, but I always was interested when I came here later on, especially when, you know, the industry selling to the Arabian industry slowed down a little bit. I got connected with some Amish. They really start loving the Dutch harness horses. And so like in 03, I met an Amish family in Kentucky. They were there while I was there judging for a week. And we start talking and never quit talking actually. He's my best friend over here. So and we start doing a lot of business over the years. And I always love to come over here, and people are so hungry for information, what we did over there, you know. But for me, it's normal because I grew up with it. You know, if you grow up in Holland, that's what I said earlier, just a way of life. The Indians knows that too, you know, that's just a culture. If you don't take your horses to inspection, you're not gonna keep your breeding program high. So you need to bring them and compete with the other one to see where you're at.
Yeah, we grew up over here with the kennel club. You bring a dachshund to a dachshund and we have dachshund babies with papers. So it was difficult for us. There's what I can't get paper because this boy I have here, you know. It's it was a real learning process for breeders over here. Even a racehorse. Nobody tells you in the thoroughbred so you can like who is available.
Moving on, thank you, Judy. Question. Go ahead.
So I a lot of what everybody said, I hear them speak and I'm thinking that's what I think and that's what I think. And I'm like, there's not much for me to say, but I'm kind of like Lisa, where I'm looking like, what would I want in a filly from this mare? That's, I have stallions that are in my nitrogen tank as well. Yeah, for me, I'm always like, okay, if I have this mare, what do I want from her and a daughter? And that's how I heavily made my choices. Is it the right thing? I don't know, but I think saying most of many breeders were all addicted to fillies unless we want, and so that's always how I've been. I try to be mindful of what could be commercial, what types and traits are in horses that people want, and I think knowing this country, for me personally, I want to produce athletic foals, foals that are naturally a bit able to do the hunter jumper or the eventing discipline. I was always the kid that I had cut out all the jumper pictures from the free magazines and they were pasted all over my walls as a kid. And I went to the World Cup in Del Mar, as a young girl. I'm the only horse person in my family. And I just remember seeing these horses flying over these jumps and thinking, that makes my heart sing. And so I don't want to jump those jumps, but I want to breed horses that can jump those. And if they, being where we are here, our biggest market, I don't think is neater 60 horses. It's everything beneath that. And people should be able to enjoy the animal. And you should want to be, I love to go out and look at my horses. They might be covered in mud, but they're gorgeous and they're beautiful. And, they're athletic and they're moving and they're doing all these cool things. So like what Josh said, you want to be, my pastures my riches are in my pastures. They're not in my bank because God knows they're all standing out in the field. And, it's nice when you hear people come and they're like, gosh, our horses are so beautiful. And, I try to be very objective and I think I'm my toughest critic as well. And I think that as a breeder, that's an important trait to have, being able to be objective and being able to know that you're never done learning. And that's what I appreciate about the KWPN system is that you are never done learning and you have to be open to making changes or not. If you love what you're breeding and you're proud of it, be that way. That's fine. But you have to be confident and comfortable that that's where you are. If those horses sell for you, great. If they don't, well then, and you're not happy with the result, be willing to change and be willing to reach out to other people that can help you or mentor you or have the judging panels to fall back on. So I think that education, all the things, health. My first Dutch horse, I bought it off of a classified ad with no picture. And I was like, please God, don't let this thing be horrible when it gets off the trailer. It was 5 years old, unhandled, his feet weren't done. I was like, what the hell did I just buy? But the price was right and it was a beautiful horse and she comes from an amazing dam line. It was such happenstance that this amazing horse came and I was so lucky to have taken that chance. So but that's kind of in a nutshell for me, be willing to be objective, be willing to make hard choices, love what you do and be proud of what you do. So there's no perfect horse out there, but this horse is perfect for somebody somewhere.
I got into the Dutch horses also fairly serendipitously. When we started, we had 2 thoroughbred mares, and I contacted a number of stallion owners when I decided to breed, and nobody was nice to me. They were all dicks. And the only person who was nice to me was Liz Hall with Art Deco. So I didn't really want a Pinto, but I was not going to spend money with somebody who was a jerk to me. So I bred to Art Deco and started learning more about the Dutch horses through Art Deco. And serendipitously, a guy showed up at our door who was a Dutch native and had been transferred to a local insurance company and wanted a place to ride. So we imported our first horse through his father who bred jumpers. And then I started traveling to Holland 2 or 3 times a year in the mid 1990s. And the amount of information is what really hooked me on the KWPN is I'm a researcher. I have to know everything. And there was never an end to the information. I could always find out more. So, and then I fell in love with the system. But one thing that Yanko's father said to me many, many years ago has stuck with me and has really kind of guided my breeding goals. He said that it's not the KWPN's job to lead the breeders, it's the breeder's job to lead the KWPN. And that really sticks with me because if you go to the stallion show or occurring and you see a 3 or 4 year old horse and you say, oh, I want to breed that, you're already 4 years behind because that's the past and the present. That's not the future. So my goal is always to be breeding for the future. I want a better and better breeding program. So that's what I do. And I'm at a point in my life now where I can be brave enough to make some choices other people might not make. I probably would have made those choices whether I could have afforded it or not. So that's, I hate to be told what to do. And
To your wife already, your latest,
no, I have not mentioned that to my wife yet. I don't think she's watching. Yeah, she's not watching. I may have bought another mare in Holland. Maybe I did. I don't know that for sure. I'm not committed to that. But yeah, it's an addiction. That's what it is. But and as far as the traveling to Holland has been the biggest benefit, I think, for our breeding program, because I see more horses than most people do, because I go so often. I go to the first ring, I go to the stallion show, I go to the mare show, I see my horses over there. So I see hundreds of horses more than most breeders in the US see. And that's really important. You cannot develop an eye for horses without seeing horses. You have to see them. And then you have to be honest about your own horses. I may disagree with the jury occasionally, Bart, but only occasionally. I mean, even when it hurts, I have to go back home and then be like, all right, he's right. And it's what you have to do. I'm a color also. One of the most important steps in our breeding program was when I developed colon cancer and when I turned 50. And I knew I was going to have 2 years of chemo and everything. And we had to sell half the horses. And it was really one of the best things for my breeding program because I kept the very best mares that we had and I sold everything else. So for the past 12 years, we've been breeding from only the very best mares. And that makes a huge difference. So if it's not that, I agree, the mare line is everything. You've got to start with the very best mare you can.
If you have 5 mares, don't get 50 mares, you only have a bottom mare. Right.
So between Bill and Wim, they've pretty much covered the entire harness industry, but I got into the harness horses through him because of his background with the Morgans and the Hackneys. I started off riding dressage horses. My trainer was a lot into the Danish horses, but after I met him, started looking at the harness horses, and I bought a weanling in 2011 as a riding horse for myself just to try it. Because really, at that time, I didn't know anybody that was riding them because they were harness horses. And I really liked it. And he was really nice. He developed well, lots of fun to ride. What I like about them for riding is how hard they try. Their athleticism, their movement, their brains, everything is great. And even the ones, like I've ridden an athlete who is, kind of the quintessential harness horse type. He's up-headed, big moving, but he's so athletic that you can put him into a nice dressage frame. He can canter. He has all of the qualities of a good harness horse that they can do anything. So while we still breed with the intention of fine harness, if there's something that doesn't come out quite like we were hoping, like he said, there is another avenue, because even Wim was saying that they are getting more popular for dressage. So I have that ability, if we hang on to them long enough, to start them in a little different direction. And the market is kind of coming there because they're interesting horses, largely in part to Verdades being half harness horse, kind of open people's eyes to what they can do under saddle. And yeah, actually we have, so he said we have the stallion Macho in the Netherlands, and Scott was kind enough to allow us to breed one of his mares to Macho. So dressage mare by Franklin. So my next prospect is a half harness horse, half dressage bred horse, which I think she's really cool and she's going to be really nice. And while we don't plan on breeding a lot of the crossbred type because our personal goal is fine harness, it is fun to kind of do something a little bit different and see how it turns out. And they offer such a wide variety for so many people that I think if people can get past the snorty up-headedness with the tails over their back and can learn how to put them a little bit rounder, they're really excellent for any discipline, I think, even for jumping, though I haven't done a lot of that with them, but they're just really nice all-around horses.
Keep one at home. And I made it boo-boo earlier. We do have Liz, who's not showing right now on our screen, as part of our panel. There she is. How do I get Liz back? And we'd like Liz to weigh
I'll
in.
come when I talk. Hi.
Okay, talk. You're on about gelders and choosing to breed gelders and why KWPN.
Well, because I'm Dutch, No, yeah, I just fell in love with the gelders horse when I was a kid, and I'm old enough to say that I rode only gelders horses back in my youth. It was just at the riding school, we used Gelders horses all the time. So I just loved them. And I did like jumping quite high with, 130, 140 for me. That was huge. I would never do that again. But yeah, so I could do a hack in the forest and they were great. I could do dressage. They were great. I could just groom them and walk underneath them and do everything I want, put my kid on them. Now I can, have still friends with Gelders horses that I would put my kid on without worry. That's the type of horse I would want to breed. And now I found lines here in North America that are not in the Netherlands anymore. So my main breeding goal is to mix those. And my second breeding goal is to, of course, have a horse with a good temperament. Like I don't breed for top sport. My main goal is to breed a horse that is family friendly, that can just, be ridden by my husband who's scared of horses, or my kids that are very small, or, that I would love to have horses in my backyard that can be taken out of the pasture by anyone. Just no spookiness, just very chill. I don't need them to be hot. I will ride them hot. I'm good at that. So that's fine. And for the rest, I just want them to be really chill, just to be enjoyable, recreational horses. That's what I want to breed. And that doesn't mean that I don't like the other breeding directions, because I absolutely love it, all of them and their breeding goals. And yeah, that's fantastic. And I probably would put a really fancy harness horse or dressage horse or jumper on my Gelders mare one day, just to see what happens. And because I would love some more spice, for example. But my main goal is to breed, like for the ridden police, mounted police in the Netherlands, or for the royal carriages in the Netherlands, those horses need to be super chill, no fuss, very forgiving. Those are traits that I worry about a little bit in general in the whole world with horses. Like I just would like to get that trait back a little bit more, with some bone, some substance, some strength, some power. Yeah, so that's my goal. Yep.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Could you all hear that a little bit? Yeah. Sorry, we're technically challenged today. Great. Well, we won't leave you out next time. Sorry, Liz.
That was totally fine.
Okay. So we're going to move on a little bit and talk a little bit more about how siblings, grandparents, half siblings weigh in your decisions. Most everybody mentioned the lineage, especially in the mare line. But are there specific things you look back to? Are they more trait performance that you're looking for in that direction? And out of making it a little bit more of a different circle, we're starting with Carmen.
I guess for me, a lot of my decision, my day job is sitting at horse shows. I'm a USF steward. Hopefully next time you see me, I'll be a judge. So I sit there and watch what my customer is every day. So it's a little bit more innate. I don't honestly think about what the customer wants, because I literally watch it every day. And it's a little bit hard, because what my customers is not honestly what the Dutch horses want. They're American ladies who jump 3 foot. So if I breed them a 1.60 meter, they're gonna die. Or I'm gonna have it, because I can't, that's not what I'm gonna sell. And frankly, I'm probably too old to ride. And so I look at, there's a lot of depth in the pedigree. I'll look back and say like, oh, this particular mare line went well with this, but it's a little bit hard, because it doesn't say hunter, so I look at it. I honestly, it's nice to use for advertising. I don't honestly think about what they're doing. It's nice. People are kind of silly. Oh, well, the sire did a 1.60 meter, and I'm like, well, you've jumped a 1.10 meter, so I don't honestly know why this is, factoring into your decisions. But and the hunter jumper people, like they look at the horse in front of them. Like they don't, at this point, I think they're getting better. They don't, they're not looking at the papers. Yeah. So, it's pretty. Everybody laughs at me. My horses are all pretty, but those amateur ladies, they want to pet the pretty horse, and it needs to be calm, and it needs to go and do its job. For me, if I breed a horse that's going to go do its job, it's always going to have a home. A good horse is always going to have a home. It's not going to get passed around. And that's important to me. At the end of the day, I brought it into the world. I don't want it to go somewhere bad.
You get to choose the direction you pass that way. We'll go this way, because we're going the other way.
Yeah, the question was what the genetics in the grandparents and all this. Yeah. I mean, it's always nice to have. For me, it's nice to get my mares. So as a breeder, I want to, like Tracy said, you hope for a filly every single time because it says. An old breeder told me once. He said you have to think in generations. I mean, it's really hard, to think ahead so much and so far, but that's the way you need to do it as a breeder. You have to think in generations and not just, the next product. You have to think where you want to go with your horses, and then also you manage them. So what I like to see in my mare lines is a lot of elite mares, so that's always, they did something. So the mares not just being bred, they did something to achieve this status. And I like that. And it's harder for mares to really be super sport horses and then be bred, because we as breeders, we want to use them as a young mare already and want to breed on and not saying wasting time putting them in sport. But the Grand Prix horses, they're usually 10 years old, 11 years old, and they have a good career. And if you don't do embryo transfer with them or any of the ICSI or any of this stuff, you're kind of like losing a lot of time, not using the genetic potential on your mare. And that's kind of gives you, that's why we start early with our mares. I usually do my mare performance tests. You call it IBOB. And then I keep going. And in Germany, I have the luxury to bring them to different, the folds, to different sites, and they can be premium folds. And so for each thing you do with your folds, and you get a little award on the fold, and the mare gets points, and then on the end she ends up having, being elite status. So that's the main goal from my breeding program, to have elite status on my mares. And even we call it in Audubon, we call it States Premium and Verbands Premium. So that's what I want to do with my mares. I'm not really particularly the one that say has to go Grand Prix. That's why with stallions it's different. They go, they do their sport. That's all they can do anyways. They're not hanging out with other horses in the fields. That's basically their job, and that's what you do. But genetics is always nice to have. That's why I like to see my dam lines with a lot of elite. And that's what I want to have in my mare lines. And that's why I'm working with the next generation towards too. And then you think about what you want to do in the next 2 generations, where you want to go with your horses. That's usable horses. That's important.
I use what the mares behind our mares have produced kind of as to look for things that might come out in the offspring more than anything. So positive and negative traits that could come through. So for example, if I'm going to breed one of our Gelders mares who's a higher percentage Gelders, I might not breed her to a Gelder stallion, but I might find one available here in North America that's dressage bred that has Gelders behind it, that I think those genetics will pull through. Because I find, at least so far, when you're breeding, some of the traits that are behind those horses, when you mix them, will pull through. So I use the dams and what they've produced and what the sisters have produced and relatives to look for positive and negative traits that will pull through in a good way or a bad way. Because, if you have a flaw in a mare that you're trying to fix, then you want to make sure that you absolutely know where behind that stallion is that trait, because he might look perfect, but if he had a grandparent that had that trait could still be there and it could still pull through. And the same thing in the positive, if I have a mare, she could present as really modern, really dressage looking. But if her dam was Gelders or more old fashioned in type, as a breeder is something that looks more old fashioned, that trait's probably going to pull through. So I'm more looking at what the traits are behind them or what were produced that you might not see for using more so than what they did.
Okay, so I also agree you have to watch generationally, but when you're talking about siblings, so the first horse I ever bred, and I think I said I started in 2019. I actually started breeding in 2009. So,
Yeah, there you go. I was getting real confused.
But anyways,
You just took out.
still thinks so good. So that was the first foal I ever bred, and he happened to be second in the country at the Curring Tour. And now, just this year, he is competing Grand Prix. He did his first CDI with his owner. And I tried It was Jazz Sir Sinclair One Royce. So that was the full. It was out of my Sir Sinclair mare. I tried for years to chase that breeding again, and I tried breeding to Jazz and multiple failed attempts. And then I tried finding siblings of Jazz. And the one thing I did learn is that no siblings are ever the same. I mean, I have repeated crosses one other time. I had a fabulous Gowdy Chuchinski foal, and I bred again. And not to say the other foal wasn't also fabulous. He won his inspection. However, it was not the same foal. And so I think you have to be careful not to chase a cross thinking you're going to get the same exact horse and the same, just like siblings with people are different. So I do think it's important to note successful crosses. And I think it's also important to look at other breeders and see what successful crosses they've had. At the stallion show, I'd love to look at if there's, a really nice stallion, and I look in the pedigree and I see maybe my mare line or similar breedings from my mares and how it crosses on that stallion. So, I factor in crosses that are successful, or, on the internet, you have access to a lot of information, a lot of videos. So if I have an idea for a cross, I can Google it on YouTube. And there's probably some out there that has had a similar cross. Now, they may not have the mare line, but it gives me an idea, and I can say, okay, well, I do like that cross. So I factor in all those things, but I definitely don't try to carbon copy. It doesn't work. So you have to look again for what fits your mare, and you have to do all the research associated to it. And I do think you also have to look back in the pedigrees, because I've also had that happen where I thought I was modernizing, but the, older style was pretty close up in the pedigree, and it came out and I ended up with kind of an older style foal. She's still very nice, but I was a little surprised, so sometimes I think you also have to count back in the pedigree to see what you're getting. So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with most of what you just said. I mean, I always say, like, every great horse out there, a top stallion has got full siblings. You probably never heard of them. You know what I mean? It's like, that I think there's dam lines out there that, are kind of made famous by one horse. And, maybe that was just a lucky little quirk. I'd rather see a consistent dam line that consistently produces good horses than dam line that there's one great horse that comes from it, then you've never heard of anything else from that dam line, So I think sometimes one horse can make a dam line a good dam line, but maybe it's not quite as good as you might think, So I really try to focus on the consistency of the dam line. I'd rather see 10 good horses come out of a dam line than one great horse, because what's the chances you're going to get that next great horse, And as far as siblings and I mean, I think we just had our third generation full crop, or third generation in our place last year. So it is interesting. I mean, we're fairly new to this. I mean, relatively. So it is interesting to kind of try to improve each generation. And like I said, our third generation was born last year. So, I'm really anxious to see what they'll do in harness. And that's the other thing, especially with horses. I've had great foals that you put them in harness and it just doesn't work, So then you're right. Yeah, right. So, it does take time to kind of figure out what they need, because again, you can have a curring champion as a foal and they just never quite do it in harness, because the brain is such an important thing in the work ethic. And so I'm excited to see if what we think we're doing is actually what we're doing as these horses develop and come into harness, and if we are picking the right stallions. And like, you see everyone here that's been, Scott's been doing it 30, 40 years, and it just takes so long to develop that eye, but you just got to keep going, just every year, it's the old, you never get the apple if you don't plant the tree. I mean, it takes a long time, and you just got to keep going. We've all been discouraged. We've all been heartbroken. We've all been, had things go wrong and spent this money, but if it's something you love and you just keep plugging along. And I think if you stick with it and keep playing, just like keep learning, we're never too old to learn. And you just got to be hungry and you got to love it. And that's what we kind of try to do. Like I said, it can be discouraging, and we've all had highs and lows, but it's really exciting to just keep plugging along and go year by year, and hope you're doing it right. And by the end of 30, 40 years, maybe you've made something in your breeding program. And I think you've got to have, especially with breeding, you've got to have a long-term view. If you want instant results, do something else. Because this takes a long time, a lot of dedication, and decades of knowledge and training and breeding and everything else. So, as far as the siblings and generations, that's what keeps you going. It's cool to see, even, Wim's, our first foal was bred by Wim's parents, what, 2000, right, Teddy? And, it's pretty wild to kind of talk to them and know where that horse came from. And, now we've got, 3 generations from that mare, and, you're talking 60, 70 years of breeding, just in that one dam line. So, just try to keep a long-term view of what you're doing. And that's kind of, I think, the best you can do.
I prefer to follow him actually, so I don't have to say too much. I think the only thing that I could think to add to what he said is, we did have the 3rd generation from that mare. And it's not always easy to find quality harness mares in this country. So we've had that dam line for a while, but we've recently found a couple nice mares completely unrelated to add some different blood into the program. So I'm really excited to see what those horses are going to produce using our own stallions still at this point, because we kind of chose mares that would complement the stallions that we have. So I'm excited to see what our stallions will do on the 2 or 3 different dam lines and kind of adjust our plans from there to see what works best, what comes through, what doesn't. So that's kind of the only extra thing. Yeah.
The best way to plan, you see it happens.
Yep.
I think one of the things that really struck me when I first started traveling to Holland was the whole generational aspect of breeding programs, that they've existed in families for so many years. Like the grandparents passed down to the parents, passed down to the grandkids. So they know these lines inside and out better than we do. So our primary mare line has been in Herod Ravorn's family for I don't even know how many decades. And I copied him to begin with. His decisions are the decisions that were continuing the dam line. Now he and I disagree vehemently all the time. As a matter of fact, when Aaron and Bill used one of our mares to breed the macho, which he had bred, and I got a very angry WhatsApp. You have destroyed 30 years of my breeding. Then I showed him a video of the filly, and he's like, "No, she's not so bad." But that's really what struck me the most is, and I'm hoping, I have one granddaughter who's 1 year old that loves horses, and I'm hoping that all of this work I've done gets to get passed on, to family members. I'm thinking, I've got these incredible horses and nobody wants them in my family. It's like, oh, what am I going to do? I've got to adopt somebody, I guess.
For me, I think I've repeated across twice, 3 times maybe. And the first time I did it, they were like opposite ends of the earth. Like one was huge, one was small. And I've repeated crosses, but I think I like to wait until you can see 3 years old, 4 years old. How are they to ride? Do you want to do it again? There's been some I've been like, God, I missed the bus on that one. But, live and learn and keep going forward and looking to the future. And I do think it's important. Like there are so many good points. Look at your dam lines, look at what's in the breeding, what could creep back up in there that you may or may not want. If you're breeding with your mare's 162 and her dam was 162, and you're probably going to have a small, you got some size there. So be mindful of all those things. And I don't have a whole bunch to add, but I just wanted to say that this is just really inspiring to me. I've kind of personally been like a wall, like, but this is just like, I feel like what like you said, we've all had hardships, we've all had highs and lows, and sticking with it, it is a thing. Like we're all heavily addicted, I think. But having the gumption to stick with it when the times get tough, because the times will get tough. But I just want to say I appreciate everybody, and I personally feel very inspired now. So I needed that. Anyway, sorry, off the topic. I'm so sorry. But it's hard. This is a hard business to be in, and if it's a business, it's a hobby.
Not to be vomiting. That's all.
There is
No, it's very interesting, this whole conversation, but yeah, as a breeder, you have to. I always say, a good one just eats it costs just as much money as a good one. So you got to keep selecting in your breeding program. You want to survive, there's just, it's our hobby, it's our addiction, but still, it's also a little bit about numbers. Hay is expensive and everything is expensive. So Yeah, I mean, I took one time, it's not, it just happened here. A couple of years ago, I got a top mare on top mare line, full sister, the only full sister doing the top stallion in the Netherlands. She was the only, and I bought her as a young horse in the Netherlands, and I sold her to a client over here when I moved here. I was kind of begging for half to get her back in my barn, and she was producing some outstanding foals, only foals. From there on, it went down. The mare had some difficulties, really sore on her feet, for example. But I mean, the foals she produced, it was just crazy. A lot, tons of motion, expression, everything what you wanted in the sport horse, but none of them got old. And actually, the mare died after 2 years too. She just had too many issues. But just a hard lesson. That puts you back to the okay. Don't do this stupid shit anymore. Because you lose your ass. So and you just fooling yourself. So that happened to me too. So just no, be tough on your own horses. You like them, but also be straight up front.
Right. Sorry about the walk around. Gotta get Liz in here. So Liz, you had anything for us?
You're talking about siblings, right?
Talking about siblings, grandparents, just how you look back and whether you look back and to what extent does that maybe come into some of your breeding?
Well, I haven't been breeding many at all. I'm kind of a beginner, but the first time I bred a horse was in 2009. So I spread it out a little bit. And I know that mare was very old fashioned and Gelder's very old fashioned. She had a very large head, like with a clunky, how do you say it?
Clunky works.
Yeah.
We all know it's a.
I didn't care at all by then.
Head.
Yeah, I didn't care at all back then, and she was very nice. But I did some research on her to find out how her previous foals came out and her line. And I heard from the several owners. I went 3 owners back that I found them and asked them about her. And the first owner was in at the border of Germany and had bred her for 3 years in a row. But all her foals had that head. And then she said that was the reason why I sold her, because I didn't want a head like that in my foals. So, and then the second and the third owner both sold her because she was super spooky and they didn't like that. So I was like, okay, well, who am I going to breed her to? And is it going to have a clunky head and be spooky? And it was. So I really tried to select a stallion for not having those traits, but the mare just straight on gave it to all her foals, the head and the spookiness. So no matter which stallion you bred them to, it didn't matter. So that was a good lesson for me. And right now I'm breeding with one of Deborah Harrison's mares, or actually 3 of them out of the same dam line. And it is Prestati mare. She had a lot of offspring. It's like a 5 generation line that I all did research on for Debbie, and then I had it all made like, how do you say it, like Wim, hoe zeg je het? Family tree.
Yeah, family tree.
So I made a family tree of all the offspring for 4 or 5 generations back and asked Debbie about each of them. But that whole line produced, I think, 8 international Grand Prix horses. So there are multiple Prestati mares in that whole line. So I just want to believe in that line, also for the blood that's behind it. But one of the mares I'm breeding with, she has a full sister that I also have seen multiple foals of. I met the owners, etc., etc. And that mare is, for starters, completely full sibling, and she is much clunkier than my mare. And then I've seen multiple offspring, and the offspring of that mare is also like 3 times clunkier than my foal and the foal before that I own from that mare. So it's really interesting. And then I just try to do research and see where that could come from, and then what I should try to breed her to this year, which I already made a decision in. And I talked to Josh a lot about that because my mares are at his property, so he sees them too, and both offspring is at his property. So that's what I'm busy with right now, but I don't have that huge experience with breeding because I wasn't born in a family of breeders, and I didn't have a lot of friends or older people in my network that were breeders. But with the job I have now and everything, I meet so many breeders. So I always try to talk to them and have them give me tips and teach me stuff. And that I really enjoy that. And also for Scott, like he introduced me to some people that are so knowledgeable also with the Gelder. So I absolutely so grateful for that, Scott. And they teach me so many things and give me stallion books so that, yeah, that way I try to learn from, also those traits what Josh was talking about and the other breeders that come through in certain lines and with certain crosses. I just try to learn from others right now. So it's not my own experience that much.
Well, great. And that's kind of what we're trying to educate everyone here today as well. So we just have a few more questions, and we're going to kind of shift the line a little bit. Some of you may have seen our survey asking your interest before when we were planning this meeting. And we got a question back from the audience on that survey. How do you evaluate weanlings and 18-month-olds in relation to your goals and your future performance? This might be really quick. So Erin, you get to start.
The best you can do is look at their conformation as a whole. If you take them to occurring, take that advice. But even still, they don't always continue to develop on that path. So they can look great when they're young, and you can either try to sell them if you choose to on that, promise, so to speak, of, the horse, look at it now, it's going to do all these great things, because no idea. It could. It could not.
Surprise both ways. You think you have the highest hopes as a foal or a weanling, and then
Yeah.
And other ones you look at as a year like that, piece of junk, and then it turns out he's great.
Yeah, or they're great as a foal. They're kind of weird looking at 2, and then at 4 again, they look great. So yeah.
First now, it's like weanling, or a yearling, and a 2-year-old. Oh, it's idiots. You just came together, and it just
Yeah, as he matured, it just all came into place. So I don't really think there's a lot you can put into the stock at least with the harness horses, as real young horses. You just kind of wait it out and see what they turn into. And so much of it too is their work ethic and their temperament, which you don't really get a taste for when they're very young. It's hard to know when you start to put them to work if they're going to be able to do it or not. Can't really tell that when they're young.
Yeah, I guess my question back would be, why do you want to evaluate them at that age? It's not fair to the horse. They're going to be ewe-necked and butt high and thin and uneven in their gait sometimes. I mean, yeah, sometimes horses don't go through ugly phases like that, but I think if you like them as a foal and you know the pedigree really well, you know the marrow line really well, then put them away for 2 years and don't look at them.
I agree. I think,
Yes.
yeah. I do think you're right. Like, how do you know?
Why
You
pick
have
that
to.
age? Why pick the hardest age bracket?
That's right. Honestly, I have people say, well, how do you sell a yearling in Israel? I don't even try anymore. Once they're past the cute foal stage, it's like, no, sorry. I'm not in a hurry. It's one thing if you have to sell them and but then how do you evaluate them? I don't know. You have to just kind of have some faith and hope that you made good choices and it will turn out well. But personally, I've kind of given up on trying to market anything after a year. So maybe they're coming 3 years old and you can see they're not shed out. They're shed out. They're not furry yak balls anymore. And that's difficult. That's a difficult age to want to make any kind of evaluation. So yeah, and I think too, their brains are growing in with them. I firmly believe that their brains do grow in as they get older because they go from wean foals and they're dangerous and they're psychotic yearlings, and hopefully they grow in some brains and get better as they get older.
Yeah, I keep it thus, a yearling, a yarling should be a nardling. That means it should be ugly, growing apart, like Scott says. And if you have faith in the damn line, raise them well, maintain them well, feeding program, okay, exercise, it should all turn out okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo what these guys say. I don't know why anyone looks at yearlings and thinks they're gonna be attractive, but if they are, they're probably gonna be 15 hands tall at the end. I mean, like they're not gonna, if you're a big horse, it is not gonna look attractive at 18. Yeah. And honestly, like I find that a lot of people, they remember what they see. So when they're like, oh, I want a video of that one, I'm like, no, because you're gonna look at it and go, oh, it's downhill, and yeah, it is, but it's not done. And I think you just have to know that and not worry about it. Like, yeah, there's the pretty ones that you can show people, and then there's people be like, what happened to that one? I'm like, yeah, see it over there. It's a pretty color, No, yeah. No, it's all good, you know. But I think you have to know your goals and be comfortable with that and not listen to what other people are saying. Like, you know, because everybody, I always tell people like, you know, the hunters is subjective, you know, and people are, oh, like, you know, and I tell them, okay, so which is the prettiest horse in the barn? Everybody picks a different one. I'm like, okay, so who's wrong? Nobody, you know, so I think you have to know what your goals are and like, don't worry about it. I'm like, they're horses, they're not perfect. I'm not perfect, you know, so I don't show people the ugly ones. You show them the pretty ones. Don't worry about it. Yeah, and just let them follow your gut that your goals are what they are and believe in it. And you know, and if they grow up and they're not, then you say, oh, okay, well, what does this horse want to do? If it doesn't want to do what I want to do, there's always a place for them to go. So I don't honestly worry about it.
I mean, everything is said here. The only thing I can add is basically when you have a yearling, and I wouldn't really judge it as, you know, the yearling and then structure wise and everything that stays the same way. Just make sure that when they're out there, you don't forget them. Make sure their feet are all good always, because there can be so much happening in the young years that they all of a sudden they turn out and you don't pay attention to it. So it's really important to keep the legs straight and look at them in a regular base, have to shoot the farrier on them and make sure that they really grow up with nice straight legs. And that's really important because on the end you have to battle a battle you don't want to do when they're older and you try to fix it then. So that's the only thing I can basically add to this. But the rest is like look at them as foals, and then usually after the yearling stage, when they become 2 years old, they change completely. They look different, their body changes, and they start blooming. And really, the stallions get a nice big head, and the mares get really feminine. So it's nice to see them grow up. But I wouldn't put too much in it. If you want to go and show them, like the hunters do with their yearlings and stuff, then you put your work in. You treat them like little show horses, and then they bloom on their own too. And you can feed them up, and you can, you know, put a little muscle here, a little muscle there, whatever you want to do. But on the end, it's basically the structure is what it is. Make sure that the legs are all nice and straight, and the conformation is good. And that's all you can do. And feed them nice, and don't overfeed them with certain foods. The Triple Crown can probably tell you about that more. And then let them be horses with other horses together, and let them grow up, because that's their time. When they're young, they want to play, and they need that time actually to develop.
Good point on the seat, not just helping them Bill out there. Experience that one many times.
I'm going to share this story really quick. I promise I'll make it fast. So I absolutely ignore yearlings and 2-year-olds, and I will tell you why. The first foal we had, the mare was from DG Bar, and she was in Colby Gowdy. And the foal from her was this fantastic little foal, and he looked great. And I was super excited about it. And then he grew really fast, and we took him to the curing, and he looked awful. He was giant, and he had nothing going for him. He barely got second premium. I tried to sell him as a yearling. No one would buy him. I was stuck with him. I was like, what am I going to do with this thing? We could not sell him as a 2-year-old. I was like, fine, we'll start him under saddle and we'll see what happens. And the first ride I put on him, I was like, oh my God, he's fantastic. His rideability was so good, it didn't matter. And he was the high score 3-year-old in the IBOP for North America, and he sold him, and my client that owns him absolutely loves him. He's doing material this year and showing, and he's fantastic, and he's great to ride. And if you told me that I was after purring and looking at him as a yearling, a 2-year-old, I would have been like, no, he's awful. He has to go. But now I'm like, I don't even look at them. Like our yearlings, we have a pasture that's down the road from our house. It's literally a mile away. It's an open pasture, and one of the sets of horses, one of the groups has to live in there. And they get fed every day, and they get their feet done, and they get cared for very well, but they're out there. So I purposely put the yearlings out there because there's no reason to look at them. They're just let them grow, and then we'll see what they look like when they go under saddle, because it can change so much.
Great story. Thanks.
Okay, so excuse me. This is kind of my thing. So not only do I breed, but I also have a full growing program. So people will send their babies to me. I've probably got about 15 youngsters from weanling age to 3. I usually ask them to leave by the time they're 3. Yeah, no stallions. No, I don't raise stallions for people. I send them to Tracy. So, my fields are full of buckwheat. I mean, I need to say, but people also then, because it's my world, they will come to me and ask me about youngsters. And the only thing I can recommend to people is you look for moments in time. You look for something that you really like about that youngster. When he goes into a trot, does he lift his withers? Does he, certain things that will help give you an insight into how they'll be once they finally are developed. And so that's what I look for. I look for moments in time. Yes, do I kind of ignore them for the most part? Because yes, they are very awkward. And sometimes they are, especially if they're out in the field in the mud, you're kind of like, oh, okay, look away. But at the same time, there are moments that you see in all of them. And so if they really want to look for a youngster and they really want to evaluate them, they have to look to make sure that there's enough moments that they really are pleased with, but then they can make the decision on what they're going to do with them. So, but for the most part, I would say wait till they're
Good point. Very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think everybody's pretty much covered this. I guess all I have to say is, if there's anything that breeding horses and training horses teach you, it's patience. And I think people get, they get a weanling and a yearling, and can I train it yet? Can I ride it yet? Can I do this? It's slow down, let them grow up and start them when they're ready. Like I said, so many people, they get that full, they breed the mare and the year later the foal's there, and they just want to do it, get on it. They want to drive it. And you've just got to be patient. And like I said, if there's anything that breeding horses teaches you, I think that's the example with these young horses. People get so amped up to, they want the finished product, and that's not how it works. You got to wait. There's nothing you can do about it. So wait till they're not ugly anymore, and then start playing with them. That's about it.
If Liz has anything to add to that. Liz, do you have anything to add to our question about yearlings, 18-month-olds, and evaluating at that age?
Now only that I have a very ugly 2-year-old. Well, I think I just don't see anything from her as a foal going on the curring. I just don't see it anymore. So I keep going back to my full video, and then, oh yeah, okay. You gotta have faith, Liz. You gotta have faith. And I'm just waiting.
Great way to summarize it, Liz. Thank you. So we've got the Fugly group. Is that what you said? Fugly group. All right. A little bit on the business side. Many of you have mentioned it, Carly, especially about, actually breeding for the buyer, so to speak. But other than in the direction, whether it's dressage or harness or eventing hunters, do you get much communication back from buyers in terms of what they're looking for? How do you listen to that or weigh that in? Or alternatively, just giving you 2 questions, you get to answer one or the other or both. How do you promote your business to a specific set of buyers? And let's see. I think Scott gets the start.
I don't care about buyers. I don't consider them at all.
They are, you're right. And I kind of have the same thing. I don't want that's maybe offensive to people, but I think like I have to love the horse. And if I love it and I can find excitement about it, somebody out there is going to like that. I do appreciate hearing from people that have bought my horses, how they are. Sometimes I'm a little scared to ask, to be honest. I don't want to know that there's bad news, but overall it's most people end up, they can give you good things, good and bad. And those are things to learn from in your future approach with things. But it's important to be mindful of what people are buying and to look at the market, but it's always changing and it's always different. So it's kind of a moving target. So.
Of course, for me as a breeder, it's always nice if you sell your horses and they're gonna go in the same direction. What is your breeding goal? They're gonna take it to the shows and the currings and as far as possible. That is good that's good advertising for your breeding program. That's the cheapest advertising. You sold the horse to them, and they keep advertising for your breeding program. So that's. Yeah, right. No, but still normally, the breeder should be still, your name is on the pedigree paper, and if maybe you have your barn initials on it, an SSF horse or a jury horse, those are famous DG car, whatever, you know, everybody has its farm name, you know, that normally stays with the horse. So that's the best appetizer.
Yeah, I'm a little bit the same way. If I like to ride it, you're gonna like to ride it. I talk to a lot of people, honestly, like I know what they need better than they do. So I know if I put the rest in front of them that they need and it's what they need, that's fine. I don't ask them for advice on it. Yeah. Yes.
What they tell you.
Yes, you know, and I talk to a lot of older women and they like to talk and talk and talk, but like I figure out what they're gonna need and then I sell them the horse that they need. They don't influence what I'm breeding for them.
My horses usually, I have them trained by a trainer. I'm not really in a hurry to sell them. I rather go with a good match for the horse itself. I can wait. I mean, I have the luxury because it's kind of like a hobby for me too, and I don't really have to count on that money. And most of them are mares anyway, so even if they don't go in sport anymore, I can still use them for my breeding program. But in a way of finding buyers, if you have to sell it, it's not that easy sometimes. You know, you put online ads out there and then you don't know who you're getting and who's coming, and they all love the horse in the beginning and then you never hear from them again. And there's so many disappointments you have to go through, but sometimes it's good to talk to trainers and see what they need looking for their clients. If you like the trainers and you want them to end up in a certain barn, that's nice always, because then you can say, I have a nice horse for you, maybe that would fit one of your clients. And then you have a little bit of control how to get the horses into the right places. And on the end, you're more happy than just selling it to some place somewhere. I mean, sometimes you get lucky, that's a nice rider and they will do good things. But if you can control it a little bit and you find the trainer and say, you know, when you have a good client, they know that you have good horses, they will come back too with their clients. If they have a good horse, they will always come back because it's easy for them to make their clients happy and they know what they're getting from you. So that's basically what I say. I don't really want to push my horses on anybody really. If it fits, and I had people, they came and I said, I don't want them really. It's not really the right person. And I said, it's not for you. And then you just say no, because you want to make it happen so badly and you have to sell it, then you make wrong decisions. But if next week there's somebody else coming and that looks much nicer, is super nice to the horse and is part of the family and they really want to bring it up and they clinic with a lot of good people, that's what you want from the end. And then everybody's happy and hopefully you see the horse doing well.
I would say the only part of the market that I really look at is what is popular and what people are looking for, more so to decide when I'm going to sell what I have. So not so much to produce something that is what people are looking for, because I'm breeding them for what I like and what I want to look for more than anything. And I figure if they're a good horse that can be successful in the sport, they will sell. But I do try to watch what bloodlines are popular at the time and what people are buying and when, just to use that as a marketing tool for when I'm going to sell those youngsters. You know, because you might have a youngster in your pasture that you're thinking, well, I might keep it till it's 3. And if the sire goes on to win something big, maybe this is the time to sell it because you have the best opportunity to sell it to the right person for it to go on and do great things. So I really just pay attention to what bloodline is popular at the time and what people are looking for. You know, the right time maybe is to market what I have, but not necessarily in what I'm trying to produce.
Okay, so I sell mostly young foals. Most of my horses sell as foals, but usually they sell by the time they turn 3. I have had people come to me and ask to do custom foal, and I don't do it. I breed for myself, and I breed, like I said, to breed a better mare, and in so doing, you end up with a better horse. And quality, people know quality, and people know they will appreciate it and they will buy it. So if you continue to stick to, I want to breed quality and I want to breed, your goals for, it just kind of creates itself, if that makes sense, because everybody wants to have a good quality horse. But that being said, it's not that I don't market them. I mean, I do spend a lot of time doing media, good media is important. I also make sure that I try to not get caught in the noise of like social media as far as stallion choices, because there's a lot of people out there with opinions, but are they the opinions that you need for your choices and for your mares? So you have to really kind of stay true to your vision and breed quality. And then you also then have to really work hard on coming up with quality media, and that will help you sell your foals or your, horses, even under saddle. I would imagine you need some of that too. So.
All right, with the harness horses, yeah. Yeah, no, well, I really try to stay true to, I have such an appreciation for back to Scott said, the generations of breeding and selection and training that went into developing a horse that I came to love. I mean, back in 2007, 8, when I was 5, whatever it was, saw these horses. I fell in love with that horse. I don't want to change that, and I think a lot of people want to change the horse for the market. I have no interest in doing that. I fell in love with these horses. A lot of great mares came over, and a lot of them are getting bred for, to different crossbreds. And I'm not saying that crossbreds are bad. That's, I've never been the type to tell anybody they're doing it wrong. But that's not what I want to do, and, so we are, I think we're starting to have a little bit of a shortage of good quality mares, because a lot of good mares came over from Holland back, 10, 15 years ago. They're getting older. A lot of their foals are, bred for different disciplines. And I guess we just really breed for staying true to and trying to continue the legacy that all those breeders in Holland have worked so hard to create. So yeah, that's what we do. We do the social media as far as promotion, but I always say I like to promote from behind a horse, not behind a keyboard. Not to say that both aren't important, but I like to go out and do what I do. And if you like it, great. And if you don't, that's fine too. I have a lot of people develop different opinions and different styles and different ideas, and I respect those opinions. But I've got mine, and you're not going to change it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I feel. So
Let's just check in with Liz. Any thoughts, Liz, on our brain fade?
Yes, my name is Liz. Was it fun last night?
Too fast. In terms of for particular buyers and listening to the buyers.
Well, as I said, I'm only just beginning, and I'm very idealistic breeder at the moment, and I haven't really thought about my potential buyers, but I do believe, and I see it here with horses gelders horses that are being sold. Of course, I follow that a lot. And that anytime that a horse like I described that is my breeding goal, like when they're online and posted online, they're gone like immediately. It's as if like everyone, or it's not everyone, but there is a large market for those like super family friendly, amateur friendly, gelders horses. And I know that the Dutch police even has like a fixed budget that you can just send the horses to them. Or like an example of them, send them the papers and a story about that you want to sell them. And they just always pay maybe people are going to respond now, hey, Liz, that's not true. But what I read is that their basic offering price is always 8,000 euros. Well, for Dutch prices, that's not low. I mean, that's in the gelders market in the Netherlands. I think it should be higher. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not breeding for the money. For me, it's just an idealistic thing I'm doing. So I think a little bit different than the breeders that are at the table. Not that they're breeding for the money, but I think they are more professionally breeding than me, because I'm so small and have recently bought these horses with these bloodlines that I think are important to maintain and preserve. So I think, that's my main goal right now. And I'm not really thinking about what the buyers want and what I'm going to make with it at all at the moment. But if you ask me again in like 4 years, it might change. But thank you.
Money always goes out.
Yeah, sure, it does.
Well, great. I think we're going to wrap this part of it up, and then I'm just going to do a quick little summary and see if everyone agrees that I've caught the gist of it. We have a lot of people here that are very passionate, that they call this their healthy addiction. Is this correct? Healthy, only that we're not hurting ourselves or our horses. And one of the things I was hearing, and I want the audience to tell me if you heard it, that you really have to choose your goals and be confident in your goals, not spend a lot of time worrying, am I picking, I have to listen to my neighbor or something like that. But it's really the confidence level that you need to carry through in each of your decisions throughout that. Is that common? Is that a good way of summarizing?
But willing to learn as well.
Getting to that one, that's next. Constant education, always learning and reevaluate, willing to reevaluate at every step. So not uncommon to pretty much any business. You're always having to look to the future and reevaluate where you are. But I'm hearing that pretty consistently. And Scott's point, and really all of you said it in a way, really looking to the future. How can you constantly look to that future, whether it's your own future and just what you're breeding for yourself and your own views, but also in the ultimate area of the industry. So I have one question more. Is there anything KWPN-NA can do for you that they're not doing right now, or any ideas that you want them to evaluate that would help you as breeders? And then we'll gather up the questions from around the place. I'll start with the line.
Okay. I just want to say when we were talking yesterday about doing the linear scoring on the polls in North America. I think that would be fantastic. I know that it's going to be difficult to do, but I think that would be really, really good to get going with doing, to have more linear scoring options to be able to look at the horses that were presented here in North America at the Currings and be able to evaluate those more. So I really feel like that's a little more important. Like obviously we have that from the Netherlands, but North America is so big that being here on the West Coast, we might not have any idea really other than video what the horses on the East Coast look like. So if we could get more statistics and from those, I think that would be really beneficial. But that's all.
Anybody else have a suggestion? It doesn't have to go around this time.
I guess, for me, like, there's multiple people at this table that I message all the time. Hey, what do you think about this? Or what about that? Or, so stuff like this where you're getting people together, so like this is a big country, a lot of times you kind of feel like you're an island. And like, it's kind of funny, like people are intimidated. Like I can tell you, like nobody in this room is probably scared to talk. We're all horse people. Like you talk to horse people at horses, they just don't shut up, So, don't be afraid to call people, like really nobody I've ever called bites. And honestly, nobody says no. If you ask them, they want to talk about their horses. So yeah, and if you're new, it is a little bit daunting, like, oh, this person had all of this, and like, why would they talk to me? I'm a nobody. And like, let me tell you, like, if you don't ask the question, the answer is always no. So, put yourself out there, talk, like first people will talk, like, and never stop. And, like, yeah, usually, like they shut the bar down on us every time and these things, like first people will not stop talking. So don't be afraid. And I think these kind of events are good because it puts a name on their face. If you're just seeing somebody in a magazine, they look all frightening, and and they're not, and like even the riders. The same people that are going through Olympics, they put one foot in the surf too. So the people don't be afraid. I think the more you can talk to people and you don't have a camaraderie with them, and because there are ups and downs, and like one day you're afraid, and the next day like everything went to shit. And everybody here has had that same experience, and sometimes you just need a shoulder to cry on, or it's just, I think that is what's important.
Somebody else is having the same bad day.
Yeah, and like we've all had it where we're like, oh, that did not go how I thought it was gonna, you're not alone. And I think that's a big one because it does feel you get a little bit lonely sometimes. And so the people that don't know everybody, like don't be afraid to ask. I think that's, this organization I think has helped me a lot in that way because it took me up to a lot of people that I talk to. And I talk a lot, so they probably know.
Anybody else have anything to add? Anybody have any questions from our audience? Boy, we told you everything you wanted to know. You're all ready to breed. All right, I'm going this way. I know I said to write them down, but this is going to be quicker.
Just any input in building a breeding program and looking at the traits of mind. Does that carry through more for in the sire line, you think, or in the dam line when you're looking at your crosses going?
Damn
forward?
line.
That was quick, damn on. Anybody else? I like when we answer all the questions in one less than 2 hour group. All right, Lisa has something to add.
Well, Tracy reminded me, something, it's kind of a negative truth that I found out as my program has progressed is if you're not careful, you will sell yourself out of breeding. So I did that. I didn't save any of my fillies for a long time. I just sold them because for whatever reason, oh, I need to sell these foals. I need to have some sort of income. But then before I know it, my mares got old and then they're not producing like they were. So I really do think you have to kind of, when you're talking about your future, you know, that you want to have in the future, but you also have to remember too, that you can't get so caught up in the now and you have to think ahead. And so part of that is don't sell off all your good fillies. Just don't, I mean, I don't want to be a collector, but at the same time, I also never want to be in this position again where I don't have any brood mares because I sold all these great fillies. So.
Good point. Anybody else? All right, I think we're due for a break. Oh, wait, Bart has the question.
Yes, no question.
Stop. Mr. Tolman. No, everybody to everybody of the panel. It intrigued me that you all said, we have to distinguish our breeding programs ourselves. You have to make also your own breeding decisions. I think that's really important. But for me, it's interesting to know what can the KWPN and the KWPN-NA especially do for you to assist you in your breeding decisions, so you can make better breeding decisions, and how can we evolve that and improve that? I think that's really important for me.
Josh kind of answered a bit, and Wim's got his hand out.
Well, I think you see most of the horses here, so you're the person right there in the field. What can help out? I mean, we are here right now on the panel. No, but I'm just kidding. But I mean, you honestly see most of the horses through the whole country, and you probably have a lot of people asking too, kind of questions about, can I adjust? Do I make changes? Or
Then I have another question. What's the next step? Also in the breeding program to get the breeding closer to the sport. How are we going to do that?
Yeah, well,
What he just asked.
okay, your Bart's question was how KWPN-NA can help the breeders in their breeding decisions, mare choices, stallion choices,
Closer to the sport.
and close to the sport. Yeah. So
That's the future.
I guess what we told yesterday at the end of the morning, that we were kind of, we were hoping that you're going to have more mares tested, so you get more information. I mean, Liberty is nice, but that's the start for a young horse. But the breeding goal is sport horse, and for every direction is its own discipline. So I think drive that horse, ride that horse, and
I think you as a KWPN, you have all the contacts to the super riders. You have basically the connection between breeders and good riders, training stables and stuff. If you somehow can find a way to connect those talented horses you see here, and maybe even establish some organization, they can start helping the breeders to promote their horses in that way, that they get to that sport level, give them maybe incentives like we do with the young horses here. We give them money, they can win. So something where they can be helped to get to that point where the horses end up in really good stables on the end too. That you see the talent, right? And you say, okay, if I can connect you somehow with this person, or we can get that program somehow started at you. It's almost like the Olympic horses, when you say, okay, you want to keep that horse in the barn, it's not for sale, you put a NOP behind, So that's something in a smaller base, not the high-end scale yet. But if you can say, okay, if we can keep that horse and get it promoted, that will be maybe a horse for the young horse, 5-year-old, 6-year-old. If you can somehow connect those riders to those horses and say, hey, we can maybe help you promote that horse, get a good rider on him, and then we see that horse in the Sangersider, at one point. This will be something for the organization because you have the connections. You see the breeding horses here, the nice horses, you see them free jumping, and if you, or on the saddle with the GES Cup, let's say, and you see those horses, and you say, wow, that will be a horse that could go to Sangersider. We find somehow a way to promote the rider a little bit, help them out, get them into the right, clinics or something, bring people over the clinic and they learn more, and then get them into that direction that they can maybe fly over to Europe and have the horse shown there. Yes, they need to somehow step up in a way to help with this part. That's what I think, and that will help the breeding on the end too, right? If you can somehow help managing that, that would be nice, because then you have it in your hands too to say, wow, we saw that horse in America, and now look at this, it's going to Sangersider and be a part of this because we somehow made the connection, or we sent the top rider over there to clinic with them, or we say, okay, go to Florida and do ride with this rider for a little bit and see if this horse does well in Florida, qualifies. Stuff like this. And if there's money, maybe even there, where you can say we can support that a little bit with fund from Europe or from here, that would be nice actually to have those horses then show nicely. Just outside the box a little bit here.
I was just going to say, I think that from an NA KWPN perspective, that we can do here is as far as talk for the sport, I think we need to popularize and do more education about our riding cup classes for the DG Bar Cup and the GES Cups. Those classes could be so much bigger here, and so many people don't. They're intimidating. We don't know what they are. What do they do? How do I qualify? What does my horse have to know? And I personally think if that's the kind of a stepping stone, right? We have the foals, and then we have the younger horses that are doing these classes, and make it available to people. Like, hey, here's an opportunity to take your horse to a show. It's going to be lower stress than a horse show. It's going to be a little more affordable, but you get amazing feedback and you learn how to present your horse at these tests. I mean, the first horse I took, it missed its passing its IBOT by 2 points, and that was a big gut punch. And we thought, oh, we're done. We've got it going. And then the next one, I'm like, we are not messing this one up. We are going to do the best we can. And it worked. It was successful, and I'm happy. But going into it, it can be, speaking from experience, it's intimidating if you don't know what you're doing. And how do you prepare? I think so. But teaching, like our riders and our trainers here don't have an appreciation or understanding of what those tests are and how to prepare for them. So they're intimidating as well. My rider was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I said, you know what? Just ride the horse. Just ride the horse. We've done the homework, and now we're here. But how can we better educate the riders and the trainers out there on what the homework is to fill those classes? So money's a big motivator for people. Like Yen said, I have my horses. There's 2 breeders on the East Coast that have started a futurity for young event horses, and they're following. You can enter as a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. They have video blogs. They have. You qualify for the championships, and they're awarding prize money. I think my horse won $2,500 last year as the reserve champion, and that's good money. That paid for my trip there and a whole bunch of stuff. And their goal is to connect breeders and riders and trainers. And I think it's a threefold thing, and it's important. And I hope people will learn to wake up to that. And it could be a good example for us to do in the future. Maybe not the K, but maybe as a team effort, the K and the NA. So.
And also, since you have Janko all the time with you, maybe you can do like a clinic in a way, just as a little side part. So people are more, people are happy to come out and learn something at the same time. And then you do the whole iBot thing, so they basically feel like, wow, I get something from it too, as a eyes on the ground. Also, the horse will do well because the rider is more knowledgeable and they can ride that nice instead of just, oh, come here, ride, and then we judge, so maybe a little transition over, would be nice, to give them a little heads up first, give them a little lesson, this, do this, take the edge off the rider, And then you will see better results too in the IBOB too, because then the horses are just jumping nicer and the dressage nice too.
We do it nowadays during the test.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I think. Yeah,
So we only have one day.
right. But I think that's the way to do it.
But can I ask one thing?
Yeah.
For me as a breeder, my point not from KWPN, but as a breeder, it would help me also if I have some reports from example how offspring of certain stallions do it in the performance tests. We do it now with the foals, with the lineage scorings, for example, and 3-year-old, but also to make a report on how they do in the testing, how the rideability is, and how the reflexes are, or how the posture is, or anything. If you have an average idea what the stallion breeds, and especially further under the saddle, before, in the end, the sports is the difference, of course, but you need some steps in between, in my opinion. So we start with the foals, doing the lineage scorings, and then the 3-year-old start book entries. But maybe the next step could be to make like a small report on how the horses breed on the saddle, the first steps, like the IBOBs or the performance testers.
Barb, you mean like what their scores would be? Like we do that offspring report for the handbook that shows how many offspring have passed their IBOB, or would you prefer to see actual scores for those?
Maybe sport, but also add some few words that
A written report to give the narrative so you understand what the horse is producing, the horse. Instead of a full report, it's a.
That's an addition to that.
Yeah, so we're talking about adding an IBOB type report, some performance report that is then structured as part of their record. All right, we have another question.
Oh,
Well, maybe not so much a question, but observation. I feel like all the people in this room that are breeding horses, 80–90% of those horses that we're producing could perform at a much, much higher level than they end up. And, you know, we have great production, we have good genetics, good, you know, nutrition, all of the components that go in there. And then in North America, we also have a great high-level performing people, you know, the top jumping people in the world, the top dressage people in the world. But where we're missing is in the middle, in that pipeline, is that there's a gap between our production and making it to that top level. I think we have a lot of horses that could be in the Olympics. Where probably somebody in this room is breeding one this very year. But where it falls short is in the training and the riding. And to me, that's another thing that maybe that KWPN could help address.
I just had a quick
Okay,
add on to
all right,
that.
it's gonna be quick because
It's really
we don't want to
quick,
be late
really
for.
quick. So I was a scribe at Festival of the Horse, and I was talking to one of the organizers for the show, and she said 80% of the horses that were at Festival of the Horse, it's a young horse competition, 80% of them were imported. They were imported. They were not American bred horses. And I just thought, well, how sad is that? So how can we get the word out to them?
Well, that's the biggest thing with raising foals, bringing to Grand Prix, you know, there's the middle, like this, like the 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, those 3-4 years are the most, and that's over here so expensive because of the distance, blindness, you gotta go, you know, if you live up north, you gotta go to California in the winter to continue training, make the horse stronger, give them a ring experience, especially for the jumpers. So that's probably the biggest difference I see. You know, if you go to Holland, everyone has probably been there, but you have like training days. I mean, there's like in the old area, there's like every Thursday, they have like jumping, started from the lowest level till 135, 400 starts at 8 till 10 in the evening. Everybody goes back home, and that's just the biggest. I mean, they pay like $20 a class, and you know, times 400. And you know, that's probably the biggest difference, you know, that's why 80% has their, no, they don't want to win, but it's so much easier there to, to train that, give that horse the experience, put the lead changes on and all that kind of stuff. And over here, you gotta have a good bank account. You just don't deserve, to make that work. Yeah.
Okay, we were supposed to have a break, so if you're really desperate, run for it. Dr. Ferris coming up next, and who's introducing him? Dan is. Dan,
But we have a half hour.
Yeah,
I mean, 15-minute break.
I did schedule. Okay, so we have a
Yes.
15-minute break.
And we can set up the computer during that.
So
break.
let's have our break and then we'll have a wonderful lecture from Dr.
I'm gonna just speak personally about Dr. Ferris. For me, what's so great about Dr. Ferris is, gosh, prior to using him, our breeding results were probably around 25 to 30%. That's not statistical, it's just anecdotal. And no kidding, we started working with Dr. Ferris, and after I trained him a little bit, we probably have results that are greater than 75% with frozen semen. And that's anecdotal, that's not statistical, but it's impressive. You don't hear me complaining anymore about frozen semen breeding because we do have Dr. Ferris here. So I am just truly honored and happy to introduce my friend, as well as our reproductive vet, Dr. Ryan Ferris.
I almost don't know if I can follow up on Dan's introduction. Dan is correct. I was working in academia and things were going quite well for me and my focus and my program there. And then, yeah, a group of horse owners here in the Northwest convinced me to come up here and consider doing this. And Dan and Gina were integral in making that connection and encouraging us to move up here to the Northwest. So I picked a series of topics here. We're going to start off talking about ICSI and embryo transfer. That was kind of the discussion that we had last year on the online things. I have changed that a little bit to maybe give you guys some better guidance of how I'm using that in my clinical program and how you may be able to take that home and use it in your clinical programs as well. And then we're going to talk about a smattering of other topics that I see as current trends in the industry. I want this to be interactive. I sometimes start getting off into science land and we're talking about prophase oocytes and metaphase 1 and they're moving to metaphase 2 and those kinds of things. And I see you guys all glossing over it in your eyes already. So if I get that way, raise your hand, ask questions. If we talk about a slide and you're going, I didn't quite catch that, stop me, let's talk about it some more. Okay, so this is for you guys, not necessarily for me just to talk for 2 hours. Okay. So in this discussion, let's just catch everybody up to speed. I think we all know what embryo transfer is, but let's just talk about it a little bit because the nuances are subtly different between embryo transfer and then OPU, ICSI, and those kinds of things. So why perform ET in mares? Performance mares, we have them in training. We still want to get pregnancies out of those high-end mares. And so this allows us to generate pregnancies and keep that mare in a somewhat active show program. Subfertile mares, obviously, mares that can't carry their own foal to term well. We use embryo transfer quite readily. Medical issues like laminitis, that mare is not capable of carrying her own foal any longer, so we're going to move her into an embryo transfer program. And then sometimes we use it for management. I have this discussion with clients, mares that foal late in the season. So she's starting to get where we might want to skip a season, but boy, the data in thoroughbreds is if you have a brood mare and she doesn't generate a foal every year for 6 years in a row, she will never pay for herself. Okay, so you have to get a foal almost from that mare that year without skipping a year. So because of that, we might use embryo transfer to help get a foal that season still, and then reset her clock, breeding her earlier the next breeding season. And then obviously we can do multiple embryo flushes per year. We can get multiple foals per year from certain mares. Kind of the schedule with this, and this will come up when we compare it to ICSI. So the mare still has to be bred just like she's being set up to carry her own pregnancy, if you're familiar with that. So it's going to take somewhere, depending on when she walks in the door, we're going to be breeding her maybe imminently. Maybe we need a short cycle to mare. It's going to be 10 days before we actually breed her. 7 to 8 days after they ovulate, we'll do the embryo recovery procedure and hopefully find that little embryo. And then we know the status of that embryo in the recipient mare 4 to 7 days after the embryo recovery. So what does that mean is that these mares are kind of out of performance or in this heavy managed time period for 14 to 16 days per embryo recovery. And then positive or negative on that embryo recovery, if we want to try again for maybe a second embryo, we're looking at 17-day intervals, embryo recovery to embryo recovery. So kind of what does that mean for me? Dan said that we get 75% pregnancy rates. I wish that was probably the average all the way across the board. But, you know, I mean, kind of I tell clients that expect 2 cycles to recover an embryo, right? So if we think 17 days between embryo recoveries, we got 17 days setting the mare up for the first cycle. She's kind of out or busy for about a 30-day period. So that can be difficult with some of these horses' show schedules and training schedules as well. The embryo recovery, if you haven't seen it, it's a relatively simple procedure. It takes about 30 to 60 minutes. We place a catheter through the cervix. There's a little balloon that's inflated. We run media into the uterus, collect the embryo, run it out, run it through a little filter, and then we go and search for that little embryo. And hopefully this is what we find, where you actually get 2, not just 1. That's a bonus. So then what do we do with that little embryo? Options are some embryo transfer facilities will have their own recipients on site. And so that embryo will just get transferred later in the day into one of those surrogate mares. Owners may have their own recipient mares. And so, especially here in North America, we're having a recipient shortage. And I just got back from a conference in Italy, and they're actually, I know there's some representation here from the EU, so hopefully they can comment as well, but they're facing recipient shortages as well currently. So owners are starting to have their own bands of recipients. So sometimes we're matching up one donor with 1 or 2 recipients that the owner has and transferring into that mare. And then very commonly, there's a regional recipient. There's a regional recipient herd that we can actually package that embryo up and ship it to. And this is very commonly done in the industry with good results. Probably the center that takes the most embryos of anywhere in the world is Ferris in Belgium. They do well over 1,000 embryo transfers a year, with the vast majority of those being shipped in embryos. So the advantage, especially for these cold shipped embryos, it's easier and less costly to ship the embryo as compared to the donor. We shipped out 2 embryos out of our facility this morning. And so they're on their way. 1 embryo is going to Idaho, 1 embryo is going to California for transfer, and they'll be in a uterus by 3, 4 o'clock this afternoon. So it's shocking how efficient the system can be. And what that allows for you as the owners is utilization of distant facilities, resources, and expertise. And honestly, it keeps your costs down as well, right? So when we look at it from the veterinary side of things, to manage recipients and keep costs down, we need to have around a herd of 250 to 300 recipients to make it pay. Okay, so that doesn't work very well here in the Northwest. As you guys see our nice rainy climate right now, it's hard to manage 300 mares. So in the more arid areas of Southern Idaho and Northern California, that's why those embryos are heading to those directions. It's a lot easier to manage 200 to 300 recipients in those climates compared to here. I would love to have a recipient herd. It's one of the things I miss the most in my practice, but it's just not feasible currently. And honestly, as we see throughout the year and over time, probably in the last 5 years, we've seen more regionalization of recipient herds here in the United States, that there's becoming bigger and bigger ones. There's one in Texas that may potentially rival Keros this year of being the largest embryo transfer recipient herd in the United States. They transferred right around just under 1,000 embryos last year, and they're on deck to transfer about 1,300 this year. And so, and that program is set up just for recipients. They don't do any other breeding. They don't do anything else. All they do is manage recipients all day. what you would have to do to manage that many mares, right? Like, I mean, that's just the reality.
Are they mostly quarter horses or?
In that neck of the woods, it's going to be mostly quarter horse mares. But you know, there's actually a fair number of warm blood breeders down in that area as well. And so it's not going to be just completely quarter horses. I'm not exactly certain of what town it is. It's around the Weatherford area. And so, but I don't know exactly what specific town in that neck of the woods. So interestingly with this, not all the management has to happen at one facility. And I'm going to put up some rather large geographical areas, but mares can be inseminated and ovulation confirmed. In this example, I used California. So this mare could be down at a show in California, actually be managed, bred, confirmed ovulation, and then come home with the rest of the herd and have the embryo transfer performed somewhere else. We do this fairly commonly in our facility where another veterinarian locally or regionally will breed the mare, confirm ovulation, let us know. The mare comes in, we do the embryo recovery with our expertise, get the embryo out, put it into a recipient. All right, this question always comes up is, can my mare continue breeding? Let me see why. Can my mare continue training while breeding? It depends. There's two different studies looking at this. One group says that you really should limit training while the mare is being bred, and especially during that early embryonic development time period where we might recover an embryo through about 25 days, we should limit their training. And the thought process is that they actually put temperature loggers in these horses and worked them, and kind of the magical body temperature they found was that when the body temperature exceeded 102 degrees Fahrenheit, embryo production rates plummeted, or pregnancy rates plummeted in these horses. Okay, so it kind of seemed like we just need to keep their body temperature down a little bit. Now, another group that was a very scientific controlled study, they weren't actually clinical brood mares, they were just breeding them to see what happened, and they had very strict training regimens for them. Now, a group out of Europe saw that and went, that's interesting, because on one aisle we have the brood mares, on one aisle we have the show horses, and both are doing embryos and being bred and whatnot, and we haven't observed that. So they looked through all their data, and they didn't notice a difference between the two groups. So I think it kind of depends, is kind of my general discussion on this, of what level of training. If you have a mare going Grand Prix and you're really pushing that mare hard in training, maybe we need to lighten her load a little bit while we're trying to breed her. If you have a mare that's just starting out and it's really just some basic walk, trot, canter work, or the old show mare that she really doesn't need a whole lot of tuning on, she's just kind of just staying fit, I think those mares can stay in training. So I think it's an individual based phenomenon. And so you'll see at the end, my words of wisdom to be successful is to have an open discussion with all parties involved with this to be successful. And I think this is one of those situations with the same thing, that we just need to have lots of discussion of what fits best for that individual mare. All right, let's talk about oocyte collection. So oocyte collection, or ICSI, it's approved by most breed registries. There's the rare breed that pops up. This isn't approved. I found out yesterday that there's a group of Akalteki mares that are coming in that apparently ICSI is not allowed to be performed in, but most breeds allow in vitro fertilization and ICSI to occur in their breed registries. And with that, what we're seeing more and more is this is becoming requested more and more every year. This procedure is becoming mainstream, and there's lots of reasons for that. To catch you up on some nomenclature terms. So these are some of the terms that are thrown around, and it's all semantics. We're all talking the same thing, but it becomes a little confusing over time. So OPU refers to oocyte pickup. This is probably the term that's used most commonly in Europe for this technique. It's originally came from cattle, and that's the term that's been used quite readily. For whatever reason here in the United States, we wanted to call it TVA or transvaginal aspiration. And so to distinguish from the horse procedure or from the cattle procedure, but it really doesn't matter. And really what we're referring to in both these terms, this is the procedure to remove the oocytes from your mare and have them capable of being fertilized. So both terms are synonymous. They mean the same thing. I use them somewhat interchangeably as well. And then ICSI is actually the process where it stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection. So what it actually is where we take those oocytes, and when they're ready to be fertilized, we inject one single sperm into them and create an embryo. Okay, so that's really what that term is. And then we use them all interchangeably. So clients call and go, I'm looking for this OPU thing or TVA thing or ICSI, and what is all of that, right? And I shouldn't pick on owners by it because veterinarians call me all the time and they don't understand the technology really either, right? It's advancing at a really fast pace. And it's really cool technology and things that you guys can use, but it's hard to keep all the nomenclature straight. So this technology originally was created at a Texas A&M and Colorado State for older subfertile mares. So these were mares that had been in embryo transfer programs for a long time period, and then we're starting to struggle to routinely donate embryos. And how do we continue getting offspring from these extremely valuable mares? Because I'm sure you guys have seen the same thing. As the mare ages, typically we get more information on her foals and the quality of her foals. So those older mares, 18 plus in age, sometimes their foals are extremely valuable, but they're much more difficult to create. And then this technology started in recent years, starting being applied to younger fertile mares that could be embryo transfer donors. And that was selected for limited or poor quality semen, convenience, timing can be done at set intervals. So if this is a show mare who's traveling around, I have a rating client that does this. She literally calls and goes, there's a 2-week gap in May that we're home. Can I schedule aspirations? And so she's actually on the calendar already in May. I think in July as well. So she completely uses this as a management tool for her of when her horses are home. And then the thought process that multiple embryos can be generated in some of these mares, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So one caveat with this is that this technology will not work well in mares that have poor oocyte quality. So if we take a 30-year-old mare, her oocytes are old. They're 30 plus years of age. Her oocytes were generated when she was a fetus in utero. So because of that, the aging effects on those oocytes would be very similar to like a 50, 60-year-old woman trying to have kids. It happens, right? But it's not as reliable as a 20-year-old woman or a 5-year-old broodmare. And then the other thing that has to happen, I showed these pictures. If you notice, these are the ovaries. There's a lack of those little black circles that we typically see when we look at the ovaries. Those are follicles. There's no follicles on these ovaries. So our ability to recover oocytes or eggs from this mare is limited. So it's great technology, but it can't do everything. Many factors affect oocyte quality, and we're going to talk on some of these things later. Body condition, obesity definitely plays a role in oocyte quality, stress, drugs, and I mentioned drugs here. My wife's a sports medicine vet. She gets this all the time because sometimes we have horses that come in of, so Ryan, Dr. Ferris, can you please do X, Y, or Z on her? And then while that mare is here, can your wife look at this lameness issue? Well, we have to balance those two things because sometimes the drug she wants to use, I'm going, not till I'm done, because that's going to affect my success. Training we touched on, environmental temperature, and then obviously age is one of those things that catches up with all of us, but we're going to talk a little bit later today about some things that we could actually maybe boost fertility in older mares. There's some really cool products available that are showing some great promise in in helping our older broodmare population. So this is usually like a 3-hour discussion, and we're going to cram it into about 8 slides here, okay? So stay with me. So when this technology started, oocytes can be recovered from 2 sources. The maturing follicle, which is the pre-ovulatory follicle, okay? So this is the one that would normally ovulate, and just before ovulation, 4 to 6 hours prior to ovulation, we're actually going to remove that individual oocyte and then take it to ICSI and fertilize it and try to generate an embryo. Now, that individual follicle has the greatest chance of producing an embryo in that session. Okay, so we all recognize that as clinicians and whatnot. The downside is that oocyte is extremely fragile. It's sensitive to any change in pH, osmolarity, temperature, and it has a set time frame from recovery to where ICSI has to be performed. So while that's where this technology all started, that doesn't make it very easy for us to perform. So groups started looking at the secondary follicles. And so these are all so when, I assume you guys have all seen at least some reproductive exams, right? So usually you have that big 40 millimeter follicle, and then there's all those little 10 millimeter follicles that we usually ignore, and they get written down in the records as MSF. Those are the follicles that we're really interested in for this technology. Okay. So in my program, we no longer care about the big 40 millimeter follicle. I want to see dozens of little 10 millimeter follicles. That is perfect for this technology. And then what we have to do, and I'm going to say this a couple times because it gets confusing. So those small little 10 millimeter follicles, they are immature. They're not ready to be fertilized. They were never destined to actually ovulate. So we recover them out, and then we have to mature them in vitro. Those oocytes will then, this is that whole prophase, metaphase thing, but the technology is those oocytes are stuck in what's called metaphase 1. So they're not capable of being fertilized. And they have to move to metaphase 2, which means they get rid of half their DNA and are now ready to have the sperm donate its half of the DNA. Okay, so that has to all happen in the lab, and then they're ready to be fertilized. And I'll give you a case example of this, which hopefully will make a little bit more sense of kind of the timing of this and how it all works. And the great thing about these small follicles is that we can have defined intervals. Roughly the average oocyte donor will, if we did the oocyte aspiration today, removed all of her follicles from her ovaries, and roughly 2 weeks, she'll be ready to aspirate again. So we can kind of set that mare up on a schedule of 10 to 14 days from today, we're going to be doing this again, or can do it again, I should say. Is that all making sense so far? Good, good. So this is the oocyte collection process. So it uses a transvaginal probe. And so here's the probe face. This is the vaginal wall. So as the clinician, I'm actually moving the ovary back against the vaginal wall and positioning it. And then this white line that you see right here, that's the needle. It's being inserted into the follicle. And then these little oocytes are adhered tightly to the wall of the ovary. The mare reproductively is worse than any other species, right? She's more challenging in so many ways compared to every other species. Humans and cattle, if they do this in, the oocyte is just like free floating on this little tiny bundle of cells. And you just put the needle in and just suck, and it just is released and collected. In the horse, because it's actually embedded in the wall of that follicle, we actually have to scrape the follicular wall to dislodge it. So that's what's happening here in this video, is we're putting fluid in and out, and then you can see this movement down here. We're actually spinning the needle that's in that follicle to dislodge that oocyte.
Is it causing any damage to the ovary?
Great question. Question was, does it cause any damage to the ovary? So great question. Overall, no. And Hallmark study at a Texas A&M, they took mares that were being aspirated for oocytes for research. And so it's a population of 10 mares. They had everything from experienced personnel to someone who'd never aspirated a mare before in their life aspirating these horses. So wide range of skill sets. Those mares were aspirated every 2 weeks for 4 years in a row. Okay. And this is for, again, research purposes. And at the end of those 4 years, they removed those mares' ovaries and they went over to the necropsy floor where some colics had passed away and obtained normal ovaries, chopped them up into pieces, and then gave them to pathologists and said, can you tell us which mare had been aspirated every 2 weeks for 4 years as compared to a mare that had never been aspirated in her life? And they could not identify any changes to the ovary. Okay. So now the one caveat with that, I will say, is that we are taking a transvaginal, we're putting a probe in the vaginal vault and putting a needle into the abdomen of that mare. So are there potential risks and side effects associated with that? Yes, right? So some of the concerns with that is we could introduce bacteria into the abdomen or into the ovary. That has been reported. And then the other major concern is hitting a structure that's we don't want to hit, right? There's a lot of things in the abdomen of a horse, and the only thing we're hoping to touch with that needle is the ovary. And usually it happens with a mare that they're heavily sedated, obviously, for this procedure. That wakes up quickly from sedation and moves quite quickly in the stocks, and that's when some of those complications arise. Now, incidence rate of those complications, low. And so I can't give you an exact number statistically and whatnot, but it would be like the similar comparison I oftentimes use is injecting a horse's joints. Everybody's heard of a horse getting an infected joint following a joint injection, right? But that doesn't stop any of you from getting their joints injected on a routine basis, right? It doesn't happen that commonly. And that's kind of a similar philosophy we use here for this procedure.
I was just thinking scraping all the time. You said you had to scrape them off, and would there be some reaction to the actual?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up as well, right? When you look at a post-ovulation ovary, right, just within an hour of ovulation, if you remove that mare's ovary and look at it under the microscope, it's like an explosion went off in that mare's ovary. It is shocking. She almost scrapes it herself. So it's shocking all the cells that are dislodged and moved around in the ovary just from the actual ovulation process.
Is it easier or more successful with mares that carry themselves before, or are there some maiden that are more difficult?
Great question. So question is this procedure easier in maiden mares or mares that have had foals? And mares that have had, there's pluses and minuses. Okay. So maiden mares can be difficult, especially if they have a slightly longer back, and especially warm blood mares specifically, because I have to remove their ovary, which is towards the front end of their pelvis, to their vaginal vault. So those mares with a long pelvis and a long back, it makes it hard to get the ovary to the front of the vaginal wall. Okay. And then in comparison, Tuesday we aspirated a mare that was 30 days post-foaling. And those mares actually become a little more difficult. Their ovary is really easy to move, but it's almost too easy to move. It's everywhere. So it actually becomes a little bit more challenging in that set. But a lot of maiden mares we still can do this procedure with. It's just a little bit, I always warn owners when they come in with a maiden mare that there's going to be some that we just can't position that ovary safely for your horse today with good confidence. Because in this video, give you a couple notes. So that's the ultrasound probe. That's the ovary. That's my hand that's inside the rectum. So those bright white lines right there, those are my fingers that are in the rectum holding that ovary back against the vaginal vault. So that's what we're trying to obtain. If there's any gap between this probe and this ovary, we're not doing that procedure, right? That's when loops of bowel can slip in there, blood vessels can slip in there. That's when we start having concerns of complications. So,
how often does it happen? What's the percentage of the mares you have to send back where it doesn't work?
Low.
5%.
probably lower than that, probably honestly. So probably less than 5%. Oftentimes in those mares, the right ovary sets 3 inches on average further cranial or towards the head of the horse versus the left ovary. So in those maiden mares, I always hope the left ovary has more follicles than the right ovary, because almost universally I can always get to the left ovary. It's the right ovary that's the challenge.
And then, to the next, and later on, you will try it again. I think there's a way to get them to that point that we can do it, or actually just out.
Great question. So the question was, if those mares, if we go, we just can't easily move those mares' ovaries and whatnot, can we see them back? For sure, if they have a foal, almost universally, yes. I haven't encountered, there's only been one mare that I've encountered post-foaling that I couldn't position her ovaries, and that's because she had adhesions in her vaginal vault, and so her vaginal vault only went in about 4 inches, and that was it. But other than that, I've never seen a mare that's carried a foal that we couldn't position their ovaries. Some of these young show mares that come in, that this is the first time they've ever been palpated. The first time their ovaries have ever been manipulated. Those can be problematic because the mare just is, she doesn't know what's happening. And it's a completely new experience with her. Sometimes we'll send them away or just leave them in house and we just palpate them every day. And then they kind of become routine with the procedure. And then that helps us position that ovary a little bit more because they're just more relaxed for the procedure, and it's a little easier. So we do this with every follicle that we see. And so our bread and butter follicles are 10 to 20 millimeters in size. And that has to do with the overall width of the follicle and the size of our needles, so we can scrape those follicles very efficiently and have a good yield on oocyte recovery. We basically go after every follicle we can see. And especially in a mare that is standing very well for this procedure, when we're done, there are no visible follicles left in their ovaries. So we take everything 3 millimeters and above. And hopefully this is what we get on the other side. Average oocyte recovery rate is 50 to 70%. And some of that depends on the mare. Some of that depends on us that day, the level of sedation, how well they're standing, size of their follicles at that time. All of that's going to play into that success rate.
How many eggs are in one follicle?
So how many eggs are in one follicle? Just one. So our ideal donor has at least, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but our ideal donor has 12 follicles to go after. And so that should get us somewhere 8 to 10 oocytes. And then that should be able to provide you with an embryo at the end of the day. So if you have less than 10 or 12 follicles on your ovary, we're going to have a discussion of, is this the best technology for your mare?
Is there a time of year that you find is like a better time for doing this, like in the spring or the fall, or
Yeah, great question. The question is for the people on the recording, is this better spring, fall, whenever? We do it year round. I kind of find from individual mares and aspirating them throughout the time frame, actually I think May to August can be a little bit, for some mares, the least likely time. They just don't have as many follicles or subordinate follicles is what we call them, all those 10 to 20 millimeter follicles at that time of year. A great time to do this is before your mare is actually cycling. So when they're transitional, right now we're using that as a management tool. I have a lot of cutting and reining horses coming in. They're not quite cycling for the season. And you go, well, we can either wait 2 weeks or she looks beautiful for oocyte aspiration and we could get started tomorrow. Same thing in the fall. Those mares will go through transition in the fall as they're stopping cycling, and you'll have more follicles on their ovaries as well. So it is for good or bad, in reproduction, we go really hard for about 6 months of the year, as most of you guys know, in the breeding career. This is changing our world a little bit because now it's almost a year-round sport for us. Yeah, it is a little tough, and it's changing things. We used to take a lot of vacations in the fall, and that's not quite as easy any longer. Great question. So the question is about follicle stimulating hormone. So in virtually every other species except the horse, follicle stimulating hormone is utilized for OPU pickup and collection of oocytes from the donor. That actually does in vivo maturation. So the mare or the animal herself will mature those oocytes and get them ready to be fertilized. We do not have a FSH product that works well in the horse. We used to, back in the early 2000s, have what's called equine pituitary extract. And so they harvested pituitaries from the slaughterhouses and isolated follicle stimulating hormone, and we could inject that into donor mares and get them to superovulate and have more follicles available. In the 2007, 2008-ish, trying to remember when we did these studies, a recombinant follicle stimulating hormone became available, and that actually worked extremely well, was very reliable. And then some big pharma company purchased it, and it's buried in their shelves, and they never plan to bring it to market. We are hoping that there is a new bovine recombinant FSH coming out on the market, and we're hoping that that may have some crossover into the horse and actually be efficacious. We're still waiting for that to see if that's going to happen or not. So, and if you want to know the real reason of why the big pharmas buried it, the group that bought the recombinant bovine FSH buried the equine one because estimate is it takes 30 to 50 times more FSH to superovulate a horse as compared to a cow. So if we're going to make that a cost usable product for you guys as breeders, right? Their concern is that the bovine industry will buy one bottle and be able to dilute it 1 to 50 and superovulate all their donors. So either the product has to cost 50 times more than the bovine one to bring it to market, which we'll never pay, or we pray that the bovine product works. So that's how a lot of these things happen. We wish they would bring it to market, but so far it's not happening. What point can we freeze the oocytes? Not now. Oocyte vitrification or freezing is done in women and in some other breeds. But again, we're looking at bringing this commercially viable. Other species. Now, our job is to get you a pregnancy, right? And in humans, they estimate that it takes 30 oocytes to produce an offspring. Well, that's not very good commercial success in our program. Has it been done? Yes, embryos have been generated from frozen equine oocytes, but again, there's a high loss rate, right? They're taking dozens and dozens of oocytes to generate one embryo. And so because of that, the technology currently today is we are generating embryos with this technology, then freezing them. They have good pregnancy rates, but unfortunately, you do have to pick the stallion today. All right, so this is the process here. And so I'm in this mare positioning the ovary against the vaginal wall. This is my wife, Dora, helping here. She's about, I don't know, 2-3 months post C-section at that point. So thanks to her for helping out right away. Pretty simple procedure relatively for equipment, little vacuum pump, some rice bags just to help maintain our temperature. And that's how we're collecting these little oocytes. Couple things that are happening here, as you guys saw in that video. So what my job is to hold the ovary and to move the needle. Dora's job is to flush fluid into that follicle and rinse it and continually keep rinsing it. And then recovering all that fluid back out into a search container. So that's kind of what's happening here. Dora has been removed from our team because she's too busy injecting joints and looking at lamenesses and all of that. And so now I have 2 or 3 different assistants that are capable of helping me with this procedure now. Rough time from mare walking into the stocks, sedation to all of her oocytes are packaged in a container is about 60 minutes. So probably time that we're actually doing the aspiration is 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the mare. So what is the success with this, right? That's what this comes down to, is what does this technology do and what is the success? So Tom Stout out of Utrecht University put together some data out of their clinical program. They found that one or more blastocysts are generated in 70% of these OPU sessions, which, to put that in perspective, with embryo transfer, we kind of have an average recovery rate of around 65%. So that's not bad, really, in the grand scheme of things, right? They did find that there was a slight stallion effect on success, but more significantly, the mare herself is what drove success or failure of producing an embryo. And if an embryo is generated on the first aspiration, that mare typically has around a 70% chance in future aspirations of generating at least one embryo. Okay? If the mare fails after 2 OPU sessions to produce an embryo, if we keep going, sessions 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the success rate falls to about 30% per session. So that suggests that those mares, for whatever reason, are not as capable of utilizing this technology to generate embryos today.
Does that depend on that? Is that why you can't breed them normally? Do they have problems there as well?
Great question. Unfortunately, no. And I'll talk about a case here in a second. The question was, could we look at the status of that mare? Is she a barren mare? Is she donated embryos in the past? Can we use that to tease out mares that are going to be successful or not with this technology? And the answer is no. So mares that are barren, haven't been able to produce an embryo in the past via other procedures, are quite fertile this way. There are mares that have given an embryo almost every session, and I cannot generate an embryo for that client with this technology. I won't say that's always a hard and fast rule, but that's kind of what we're seeing on average coming through. How about over here, and then I'll get to you.
So there's no stallion effect on success, or minimal, but is there an effect of rebirthing, breastfeeding, or just a standard frozen job?
Great question. Lots of variability in this. In general, fresh semen or a single frozen straw that you would use for traditional breeding have similar pregnancy rates. Now, there's going to be individual stallions where fresh semen will be better than the straw, but we're going to be very similar. What she's asking about is these refrozen straws where they take a stallion semen, and roughly there's 100 to 200 million total sperm per straw with frozen semen. They dilute that and make 100 what's called ICSI straws. So now these straws only have 1 to 2 million sperm total in a straw. And then when we use that for ICSI, what we observe is that the pregnancy rate, the initial blastocyst rate and the initial pregnancy rate in the recipients are similar, but the early embryonic loss is almost triple. Now, again, that's going to be highly stallion dependent. That idea started with a quarter horse stallion here. This technology really advanced with one quarter horse stallion called Highbrow Cat. He's a famous cutting horse stallion. As he got older and they ran out of frozen semen, they started using him for ICSI. Phenomenal success rates with that individual stallion. I think you could thaw his semen, jump up and down on the ground, and just throw it in a dish, and it would still somehow make an embryo. Okay, so his semen is just phenomenal. Now, when we applied that to other stallions, that's when we started seeing a lot of these issues pop up. So, if I had my preference, if that's the only straw you can get in the world, okay, and my job is to just be cognizant that we may see higher embryonic loss rates with those embryos when we actually go to transfer them, but that's the best we can do. If you said, well, I'm picking between a frozen traditional straw and a refrozen straw, and I don't know what stallion to pick the one that's the traditional.
Mm-hmm.
There was one more question back here, and then
You were speaking earlier when you talked about oocyte collecting, and there said something about weight or condition and success there. Like for example, performance horse, and she injured it, no longer do that. She's in the house for a couple of years ago, so she's not fit, or she's overweight. Or did that be something you consider changing before the study? Like something.
question about obesity, and Can I table that topic for about 30 slides? Because then I'll give you some data and some information of what I think, how I think obesity impacts it, and it'll apply to this as well. That's talking about traditional breeding, but it'll apply to this as well.
Mine was about the, with the ICSI, so if you, when you take a regular straw, do you take a piece of the straw, do you use the entire straw, and then I've seen where they were having an OPU session, does anybody else want to get in on this? So are there multiple people using one frozen straw to breed numerous mares?
Okay, so I'm going to use this slide as an example. So the question is are we using the whole straw? And the answer is typically no. Usually they're taking just a small snip of it. Because again, there's 100 to 200 million sperm in there. And really, we're going to do some selection for those sperm and whatnot. But what we really need is this many sperm. Right? So we're going to throw away more. We're going to throw away 99.9% of the sperm that we thaw that day. So yes, there are clients who go, look, I have access to the straw and I have, can you aspirate these 2 mares? And I have 2 buddies in California and a friend in Florida, and they're all going to ship all the eggs to one center. So when they thaw that one little snip, it can be fertilized across multiple mares. So for a straw that's the last straw in the world, yes, a lot of people do things like that. Freezing of embryos, embryo transfer versus ICSI. So uterine recovered embryos will have around a 60 to 65% transfer success rate. Okay, so that's pretty well established in the industry. These ICSI derived embryos have a 60 to 80% transfer success rate. We have a higher success with day 7 generated embryos. And I'll give you an example of what I'm kind of talking about with a day 7 embryo here in a couple slides. Those embryos have the greatest success as compared to a day 9 or 10 embryo. And then with these ICSI derived embryos, we do see a slight increase in early embryonic loss as compared to a fresh transfer that from a mare that we recover the embryo from her uterus and transfer it into a recipient. We do see higher embryonic loss rates. That is much more profound in embryos that are day 9 or 10 being generated versus 7 or 8. And that's why for the European colleagues, Cesare Galli is probably the leader in ICSI in the EU. He refuses to freeze any embryos after day 8. Now, here in the United States, we're still freezing those embryos. And partly the reason is if you do the calculations all the way, what's the odds of getting a live foal from those day 9 or 10 embryos? It's around 30 to 40%. And we're kind of going, that's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. And for some mares, that may be all we ever get. So we're a little less selective here. So is ICSI replacing embryo transfer? I don't think so yet. And it has to do with the fact that there's that subset of mares out there that are fertile with other technologies, but not this. So I don't think it's replacing embryo transfer yet. I see it as a management tool. It's a great option for us, for show mares, especially non-cycling donors that come in that aren't ovulating yet themselves. So we can't do traditional embryo transfer. This is a great technology to utilize. And then obviously problem mares. Couple things in the industry, true IVF. So up until now, what we've been doing is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Every other species does true IVF, where you just put the eggs in a dish, you put some sperm in the dish, and they make embryos. That doesn't work in the horse, really. Of course not, exactly. So your breeding fees are going up there, by the way, my friend. So Dr. Katrin Hendricks at University of Pennsylvania has described the first, she says it's repeatable, but I'm going to say semi-repeatable IVF system in the horse. Okay. Now that's really cool technology for us. It looks really amazing. The initial results look great, but couple things. Right now it's limited to fresh semen only, and the stallion has to be collected on the same center as the in vitro fertilization to occur. So that's one big limiting factor. The other thing is the repeatability of it. She's having great success and it'll work beautifully for 2 months and then it crashes for 3 weeks. And she's not exactly certain why that is. And she gave a presentation. I'm a member of the Select Breeder Service here in the US. And so at our annual meeting, she presented her data to us and all of us were dreaming of going home and building these IVF labs. And that's what we're all going to be moving to in the next couple of years. And then we all remembered Katrina's words of, it's not commercially viable yet. So she's working towards that. And if it ever gets to that point, I think it can be a game-changing event, but we're not there yet.
Does that involve any treatment of the zona?
No treatment of the zona. Actually, most of the time it's a sperm issue and it's a sperm binding issue. And so what they actually found was that you hype these sperm up on promotants to keep them alive and then let them sit for 24 to 36 hours where they should have died by then traditionally, but you give them so many stimulants, they stay alive and then they're capable of fertilizing the egg. So she's actually using it as a research tool to understand how does fertilization actually happen in the horse. So maybe we can help other stallions out there. We're all looking at this going like, how do we use this for our commercial programs?
Well, she's basically creating a uterus environment in the lab.
Correct. Correct. Sex semen. This is a group of barrel horses here, filly or colt. Sex semen offered via ICSI. So sperm can be sorted. We've known that for years with flow cytometry. It's kind of amazing technology. They shoot these sperm through at about 100 miles an hour through a device. It can detect whether those are X or Y bearing sperm and then sort them. And then those sperm can be used for traditional breedings and other things. Right now, they're starting with using this for ICSI at this point. And so this may be something that really changes the world of breeding, right? You can essentially make designer babies. If you want a filly, you can get a filly. The question is, am I doing that? Usually that's being done on the stallion side of things. And this gets into the whole legality of who owns semen and those kinds of things. In these quarter horses, you buy pregnancies. So the semen that you get is actually owned by the stallion owner at all times to generate you a pregnancy. So if you manipulate it, that's a breach of contract. So these are actually stallion owners offering the service to their clients.
How common is it to see sexed embryos here? Because I know I've seen them a lot in European auctions, but every time I've kind of asked around it, they say we don't sex embryos.
Yeah, great question. So the question is about sexed embryos. For whatever reason, that's not really caught on here in the United States. As we're starting to see more ICSI and OPU done, and especially with those mares that are generating multiple embryos per session, I think we're going to start seeing that more and more. But up until now, clients have just been so captivated with the fact that, yes, I can get a baby from that mare. I don't really care whether it's a colt, a filly, or otherwise. But I think we're going to start seeing those selections happening.
Could you do it? Could you do it? Could you do the...
It can be done. Yeah, I mean, so basically you just collect cells from the early embryo. UC Davis is the group that has all the genetic markers. So usually we send them to UC Davis here in the United States because they could sex it for male, female, and like, the warm blood fragile foal syndrome. They could actually screen those embryos against that.
So basically you look at the embryo itself and see if it's a filly or colt.
Correct.
But you cannot select the sperm cell. That's basically...
We can select the sperm cell as well.
Right. Can you do that? You can select sperm cells already?
Yep.
So if I have the semen and I say I want a filly, you can do it.
We can't do it with frozen semen yet. Right now, we're at the ejaculate level. There is a group that's coming out with some technology that hopefully we could take that small little snip off the straw and sex that and have it available for ICSI. So previously frozen semen could be sexed, which is going to create a whole nightmare of questions for the stallion owners in Europe. So shipping semen over here. Yes, sir.
You see there's more than finished.
More colts versus fillies. I know Cesare Galli has reported that. We haven't observed that yet. I'm staying in contact with several of the ICSI labs that are using these two stallions with sex semen. Because the question is the blastocyst rate going to be different between sex sorted female versus male? And does that play a role in getting us more colts and fillies with this technology?
Just a word on the sexed embryo. I think some of that might be a terminology issue because I will see what I consider to be in utero foals. I mean, in utero fetuses that have been sexed, and they're calling them embryos for whatever reason. I don't understand that, but
Yeah, great comments. The comment was that sometimes these are in utero pregnancies that are virtual sex, not necessarily a frozen embryo sitting waiting to be determined. All right, the big question, embryo transfer versus OPU, what does it cost? Okay. So this is data from my clinic. So this is embryo transfer, number of cycles to achieve a pregnancy, 1.7 with a median of 1. Time at the facility, 25 days, median of 22. I blinded all of our data here a little bit. This is for a publication we're submitting, so we're not supposed to share with other veterinarians what we actually charge because that's considered cost fixing, and I don't know, there's a lot of rules with that. So if X is what it costs you to obtain an ET pregnancy, it's roughly going to cost 1.2 times X to get a ICSI pregnancy. And those are not statistically different. So which means that essentially it costs the same to do ET as ICSI in some cases. Now, when we look at the individual mare data, what do we see? Well, if you have a nice young 5-year-old mare that walks in and you're breeding with fresh cooled semen, you're probably going to get an embryo in the first cycle or have a high likelihood of it. Those mares are significantly cheaper doing embryo transfer versus OPU. What we notice is that if it takes you 2 cycles, what would have taken 2 cycles in embryo transfer? And on average, it's a wash with doing ICSI and OPU. If it takes you 3 or more cycles to generate an embryo via ET, it is definitely much more cost beneficial to do OPU ICSI as compared to embryo transfer.
I think one of the universal issues is the education on the field that the statistics tend to end at the pregnancy stage because it's very hard for each clinic to do the actual live whole rate once the mares need their care. But in general, is there universally a lower live whole rate once you achieve the pregnancy with ICSI? I know of so many after heartbeat, after 90 days pregnancy losses with ICSI embryos and very few of regular ET.
So one thing I should mention for this, not a huge number of mares, about 20 mares in each group. And that's because our strict criteria was you either had to have delivered a live foal to say, yes, that's what the cost was to generate 1 pregnancy for you, or be at least 7 months in gestation. That was the best I could for the data. Otherwise, I lost even more mares over time looking back at this. So odds are that should generate you a pregnancy. So especially in those day 9 or 10 embryos that we were talking about, those embryos have a higher rate of loss from heartbeat through about 90 days. So as I'm advising clients, if you have the choice, if you were to go, I want to go buy this ICSI generated embryo, my friend has it for sale, and they said it's a day 9, I'd go in, I don't know if I would buy that one or make sure it's a reasonable deal because of that embryonic loss rate. If it was a day 7 embryo, I wouldn't be as hesitant. ICSI.
So if they take longer to reach the stage of freedom, then
that is less, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If we fertilize you today and you develop in 7 days, which would be normal, you have a good rate. If it takes you 10 days, it took you 3 extra days to reach the same developmental stage, you are not as normal. It took longer for you to get to that stage. So of course, there's probably issues with that embryo and its development.
So then if someone calls you out, if the document has called a day later, oh, we got another embryo, don't look down that one.
I usually recommend to clients, let's freeze it and see what it's a bonus. I wouldn't count on that one for generating you your baby. Dan?
8 is less, you know, and 9 is.
So kind of what I say is 7 and 8s are beautiful. 9s and 10s, those are bonuses. Don't count on them.
Okay.
So I just mentioned this, that if you go greater than 2 embryo transfer cycles, then OPU ICSI might be a better economic alternative to you. The interesting part in this group of 14 mares, 6 of those mares have a combined 15 additional frozen embryos. So not only did they get their 1 pregnancy and a recipient, they have 15 frozen embryos sitting out there waiting for future transfer. So that is where this technology is becoming game changing in some of those mares. So clinical case, I'm sure Dan and Gina have shown you this mare. If not, they will. I'm sure. So this is from October. She came in, we palpated her 1 time. She had multiple small follicles. On October 13th, we got 18 oocytes retrieved. On the 14th, she went home. That's what her breeding management looks like for OPU and ICSI. Now, I put this here that we require that our mares stay the night after the OPU ICSI, and that's just because a lot of the veterinarians up here in the Northwest aren't very familiar with it. So if there were any issues with that mare following the aspiration, they don't really know what happened to her that day. So we feel more comfortable keeping those mares in-house for 24 hours, just making sure everything's okay, and then discharging her from the facility. So what does that look for a timeline? So on the 13th, we recovered our 18 oocytes. On the 14th, those oocytes arrived at the lab and were moved into maturation media. So remember, I mentioned these oocytes were not technically supposed to ovulate, so they're immature. So we have to mature them to be ready to be fertilized. 12 of those oocytes matured, and ICSI was performed on them. 10 oocytes cleaved, and that resulted in 2-day 7 embryos, 3-day 8 embryos, and 2-day 9 embryos. So 7 embryos in total. So what I would tell Dan and Gina is you got 5 embryos with great chances to produce foals on the ground for you, and you got 2 that are going to be less likely. 40%. Better than 0%, but not as good. I don't have the data in front of me. So this is the good. This is what we all like to brag about, and myself and whatnot. So let's go to the bad. So this is a 12-year-old Frisian mare. Frisians have their own issues, but I think it's real data, right? Look at this. This mare is donated. I think she's donated 6 embryos and carried 2 foals to term. Highly fertile. Okay. She's giving us reasonable oocyte numbers. Stallion 1, we got 22 oocytes from. Stallion 2, we got 14 oocytes, no embryos produced. So kind of what we see in the clinical programs is 10 to 15% of mares, this technology just does not work well in. And it seems to be driven by the mare herself. Or potentially the breed, but
We have experience with regions and done it on young mares, and it was horrible. It was, we did it at Peterson's.
Yep.
And they would get to this, they would develop, and then there'd be nothing inside the black. Was that the black?
blastocyst.
Yeah. It's just regions.
But I could switch that breed and have other examples that would do a similar thing. She was just one that came in almost the same time frame as Dan and Gina's mare, and so I was like, ooh, that's kind of a great case example.
Yeah.
Dan and Gina's mare was with me for 3 days. She was with me for 8 weeks, and we never produced anything.
I believe it.
We used 2 different stallions in this. Yes, ma'am.
Of course, you didn't charge them because you got nothing, right?
That older mare where you're kind of racing with block and you're not sure how many sessions you could get done of it. Would you have multiple stallions used in a single OPU, or would you just run back 9 weeks if you can?
Great question. So the question is using multiple stallions in the same OPU. My typical recommendation is on the first aspiration, we see what your mare produces. If she produces you 1 embryo in that session, it's probably not worth splitting her eggs to 2 different stallions in subsequent sessions. If she does like what Dan and Gina's mare did, I would split that mare in subsequent aspirations, because then you don't get 7 from 1 stallion. You'd get 2 or 3 from 1 stallion, hopefully, and 2 or 3 from a a second stallion.
The embryos are for sale.
I don't know what stallion Dan is, to be honest, like,
Red straw.
Which school do we put our ticket in?
so keys to success with all of this, getting everybody on the same page, right? I've given you guys some examples of that, making sure that everybody's working together towards the same common goal. And sometimes it's something as simple as my wife wants to inject the stifle of this mare and give her a dose of Banamine. And that's going to screw up the ovulatory phase where that mare currently is. And she's most likely going to have an anovulatory follicle because of a dose of Banamine. So sometimes it's something very simple like that that can completely crash the system and prevent success for us. So trying to keep everybody on the same page and discussion and all those kinds of things is extremely valuable in this. I hope you don't have more questions about OPU ICSI because I think I've covered the gamut. But
Question about Banamine you just mentioned. I had no clue that Banamine is going to interrupt the cycle or potentially cause an ovulatory follicle.
so in the 36 hours prior to ovulation, if you administer a dose of Banamine, 80% of those mares will form an anovulatory follicle. It's actually a model that we use to form anovulatory follicles in research. And so if a mare is colicking like that, right, and needs a dose of Banamine, we give the dose of Banamine, but just recognize that's going to mess with her cycle. But if we can delay the joint injection 3 days, let's delay the joint injection 3 days and then give the dose of Banamine or whatever they need to give. I don't know what they all give. That's not my wheelhouse, and work there.
Mentioned age earlier for success rate. So what age is approximately like?
Age is too late. You know, once mares get over 15 years of age, we're going to start to see a decrease in fertility because of oocyte aging. So there's never, the sooner you can get to them, the better, right? You know, I mean, but no matter what, from 15 onward, it's just going to keep going downward.
This is it's kind of like, the terminology, like what is a blastocyst and then what is cleave? Like those are words I've heard, but I don't know what those are.
So when we inject an egg or an oocyte with sperm, we technically have a one cell structure at that point. Okay. And what should happen over the course of the next 24 hours is one should become two. And that would be considered cleavage. So an early embryo developed. Now, some of these oocytes are not going to ever go from the one cell to two cell structure. And so there's a loss at that step. They did not cleave. And so they have no opportunity to become an embryo. So partly it's setting up your ideas of success. So if we go, hey, we injected 10 and 8 cleaved, well, the maximum number of embryos you can get at this point is 8. Because those other 2 are dead and gone. Okay. A blastocyst is basically just a morphological stage of an embryo. And so with that, that would be an embryo that we would typically recover from a uterine flush. And it's a distinct way of going, yes, that is a viable embryo. All right, so the formatting on these next slides is a little rocky. I apologize, but I basically went through all my veterinary presentations and went, what's new? Okay. So some of them are from a variety of meetings across the United States and the world. So bear with me, the titles change just a little funky, but the mare will still not get pregnant. So this is a 6-year-old warm blood mare. In March, we bred her. She ovulated on the left ovary, embryo recovered. In April, we bred her. She ovulated off the right ovary, no embryo. In April, she ovulated off the left ovary, embryo recovered. And then in May, she ovulated off the right ovary, no embryo recovery. And as we were starting this next cycle here, her big follicle was on the right. And I mentioned that, and my assistant went, ah. And I go, what are you talking about? She goes, we've never gotten an embryo from this mare's right ovary. Okay. So the question became, is her oviduct blocked? And now this is becoming a big conversation in the industry and stuff like that. So mares can get blocked oviducts. We've known about that for 30 to 40 years. Okay. The mare ovulates this massive follicle and secretes all these cells. We kind of talked about it earlier, being this explosion during the ovulation process, and all these cells are released, and all of those start traveling down the oviduct. And then the horse is unique in many features, as we've discussed. If that egg is not fertilized, so the mare is never bred, and she cycles every 21 days, whether she's bred or not, right? Those oocytes just stay in her oviduct. Okay. So over the course of time, she may have dozens or hundreds of oocytes just sitting in her oviduct. So the embryo has to release the hormone PGE2. If you want to, cocktail party fact, that's the hormone the embryo releases, and that signals the oviduct to actually open and allow passage into the uterus. Okay. So we've known about these issues, but we were really stringent in how we diagnosed them. And probably less than 1% of mares were diagnosed with blocked oviducts prior to recent years. And that's because there became a treatment that was readily available and easy to use and inexpensive. So now all of a sudden, every mare that's not getting pregnant has a blocked oviduct. Okay? Or at least getting treated for it. You bring up, and I'll comment of why I'm using it. So I'm guilty of this, right? Like you try something and it works and you're like, let's try it on every mare, right? So 3 breeding seasons here, 40 mares that had a history of unexplained infertility. And I think this is kind of the key part, right? If your mare is not getting pregnant because she has a chronic uterine infection, she doesn't have a blocked oviduct. Okay. We couldn't identify any abnormalities on workup. We placed misoprostol, which is a synthetic prostaglandin E analog, up by the uterine tubule junction, kind of like we would with deep horn insemination. And then 33 of 40 of those mares became pregnant within 2 breeding cycles. So that looks pretty phenomenal.
Sorry for interrupting. Sometimes it does take you 2 cycles though. It doesn't always work the first
The average pregnancy rate is 60% per cycle, right? So even after 2 cycles, we only expect 85% of mares to actually be pregnant. So some of these failures could get pregnant if we gave them another chance.
Yeah.
So because of that, this has become this data has been presented by multiple other groups, have very similar data to my own, and now every barren mare is just getting their oviducts treated. I think we are over-treating their oviducts, is what I will say. And my colleague out of Kentucky beat me to publishing this data because I have very similar data to her, and we were in competition and she got hers published first, so I have to give her credit for it. But after we treat this mare's oviducts, if you do a low volume lavage, 63% of mares had light to heavy growth. So it seems like just the process of doing this treatment is activating potentially some dormant bacteria in the mare's uterus. That's the cause of her subfertility, not blocked oviducts. And that's probably where I'm using it as well. I'm saying I'm treating her oviducts, but really what I want to do is culture that mare the next day. And we see very similar effects in our group as well of diagnosing bacterial metritis off this treatment. So I think it's almost better as a diagnostic for subclinical bacterial infections as compared to treating blocked oviducts. But it's kind of when these mares come into me, oftentimes when I get them, it's she's been barren for 3 years, you get 2 cycles, go. And so I throw the kitchen sink at them.
So in the original case, you had the one who looked as if it really was an oviduct issue. Is that something that does occur? Is that something that...
It is something that does occur. It's probably less than 1% of mares.
Okay. What you described is literally the same example I had from one of my mares.
Yeah, and with that mare, we treated her right oviduct exclusively, and she started donating embryos out of her right oviduct after that. Can I say she 100% had a blockage? No, but there's not a diagnostic test to say, yes, you have a blocked oviduct. So it's kind of like a rule out of, we've done everything else. You should be fertile. And we do this and you get an embryo. It's a little bit cause and effect, but maybe more of an association.
So is the misoprostol lavage, or is that somehow releasing bacteria that have been, somewhere that you couldn't reach the low volume lavage prior?
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a couple slides. Export of embryos. For the first time, the EU and the United States actually have well-documented rules and regulations for shipment of embryos back and forth between the EU and the United States. it is still a quagmire of stepping into, because neither party really, they put it in paper, but then when you ask for like specific details, neither group is great about actually wanting to say, yes, this is how you interpret that sentence. And both sides like to use and or but statements as they do this. So they go like, the rules are 14 days in quarantine and or but they could do this instead. And you're like, what and or but? How does that work? Like which one? And so that is some of the limitations, but potentially we may see this more in the future.
They will be exported to India and then the food will be born in India because they have a bigger herd of mares.
That very well could happen. We may start seeing that of having to export for recipient costs. All right, so to get to your question about these bacteria that are living at low site, this was part of my research focus in Colorado State, and it's blown up in numbers of every mare has a biofilm as well associated with them. So bacteria can live as a free-floating state, as individual bacteria, and kind of to put it out there, it's like every man for themselves, right? Every bacteria is out there just looking for food, looking to divide and multiply, and that's really it, okay? Now, the biofilm state is when these bacteria start coming together and they actually form a little community. And basically, it's not my individual survival, but the group's survival now at this point. So that changes things. So now these bacteria become highly antibiotic tolerant. They're not resistant, they're tolerant to antibiotics. They become resistant to the host immune system, and they have extremely increased survival as compared to individual bacteria. So you brought up the question of where could these bacteria be setting? So this is, I think, one of the coolest studies I ever got to be part of. We took bacteria from the mare's uterus, we genetically modified it to glow in the dark. So for the first time, we could inoculate a mare with those bacteria, establish an infection, remove her uterus, and image it and go, where are those bacteria actually harbored? Okay, so kind of cool information. So this is the mare's cervix in her uterine body. This is one horn in the other horn. So what you see is almost all of the bacteria are up in the horns of the uterus in this example. And so that's probably why we're missing these mares on various diagnostics. Because if you do a traditional culture or you do a biopsy, you're oftentimes sampling back here in the uterine body, and you're just not getting up there. And that's where your veterinarians may be talking about wanting to do low volume lavages, or in this case, the misoprostol treatment with culture. We're basically just trying to stimulate those bacteria that are up here in the horns to start dividing more, and then we can actively diagnose that infection. This is what it looks like on biopsy. It's this adherent mass of cells. And when we start doing this with the biofilm, you think that there's going to be billions of bacteria out there. Actually, these colonies are extremely small. There are a few dozen bacteria in total. So we're not talking about huge inflammation or anything like that going on in the uterus. It's like the example is a traditional infection is like sending in the entire army, right? For invasion. It's shock and awe, all going on. Biofilm is like sending in the Navy SEALs. It's a few select little bacteria. They don't want to cause too much problem because then the host immune system is going to come destroy them. So they're just going to hang out there, low level. No one knows they're there, and hide. Because you give this nice, rich nutrients that you're going to feed your embryo to those little bacteria, and they go, this is a wonderful environment to take over. And they do. So as the proverbial world expert in biofilms in the equine uterus, this would not be my top differential for why your mare is not getting pregnant. Okay, I do think they can occur, but it's not going to be every single mare that's barren has a biofilm associated. The hallmark history on these mares is you have a positive culture, you treat them appropriately, and you're still culturing that organism. Alternatively, I'll say that it depends on your sampling technique. We know with biofilms, we're going to have some false negative samples. by just doing a traditional swab. So maybe doing a low volume lavage to rule out these mares, but this is not something that every single mare out there has. It's usually going to be older mares, poor perineal conformation, or some sort of immune suppression. Obesity, Cushing's disease, metabolic syndrome, those issues are going to be the mares that we're going to look at for this. The 8-year-old young mare that's not getting pregnant, she doesn't have a biofilm. Okay, obesity. This happens to be a quarter horse. So these two quarter horse mares came in, 16 and 17-year-old maiden mares. They're breeding with frozen semen. And what this picture is designed to show, you could probably pour 2 gallons of water in that mare's back. Okay? That's what I'm trying to show there. The history on these mares, they grew a normal follicle, edema, everything looked great. We AI'd them with frozen semen, severe post-mating induced endometritis. This then continued for 5 cycles for each mare. One mare was pregnant after 5 cycles. The other mare was still open. So does obesity play a role in fertility? Historical studies would say no, it does not. More recent studies say, yes, it does. I don't know. If you compare the old studies, what they did is took mares in normal body condition, fed them to obesity, and then tried to breed them. Okay, that makes sense. But that's not the mare population that we're seeing, right? We're seeing the mares that have been obese for years that are now presenting. So I don't know if it's exactly comparing apples to apples in those situations. That would be the ideal goal, is to get her thinned down. So with this, the research is mixed, as I just mentioned. In my opinion, or I guess I just have some data to show this, obesity is associated with subfertility. If we look at mares that have a body condition score of 7 or greater in our clinical program, 80% of them will accumulate fluid post-breeding. Okay? Accumulation of fluid post-breeding is the #1 cause of subfertility in the mare. So whatever we can do to get these mares not being obese is extremely helpful. So what can we do? Sometimes we can put them on. There's a little bit of data that platinum GI can help augment what's happening to those oocytes with obesity and improve fertility rates. Ideally, let's get them increased exercise. And turnout is not exercise, right? That's like saying, Ryan, go to the gym. Well, I can open the door and walk in. Does that count? No, somebody has to go with a hot shot and put my butt on the treadmill, right? Like, same thing with these mares, right? So this is at our facility. We put in a panel walker for this exact reason, right? Let's get these mares moving and get them exercised. If you have a panel walker, you probably use it for all your show horses, but put your brood mares on it. Get them moving. Because otherwise, what happens if you turn your brood mare out? They run for like 30 seconds, and then they have their favorite spot in the pasture to stand, and then they don't leave that spot till you bring them in at night. And really working with you guys on education of nutrition and getting this mare in better condition prior to coming to us. Because once she comes to me, it's almost too late. There's not a lot that I can do at that point in that breeding season to correct this. Maternal age and its effect on fertility. As we talked about earlier, mares 15 years and older are difficult to get in foal. That's not only due to age, but also a wide variety of other reproductive problems become more common. Accumulation of fluid post-breeding, chronic uterine infections, poor perineal conformation, lots of other problems. However, there's a series of in vivo and vitro studies in older mares looking at pregnancy rates. And especially with OPU and ICSI, we recognize that there are these older mares out there. So we're going to remove all of her other reproductive problems, right? And we're just going to go straight to OPU, ICSI. And that mare's oocytes just do not behave normally. So we definitely know that the oocytes affect our quality, and especially in older mares, we're going to see deterioration of oocyte quality. It appears that it's really the metabolic function associated with getting to metaphase 2 in these oocytes that's affected in these older mares. So the question is, can we boost metabolic function in these old mares' oocytes? So this is a study out of my old place of work out of Colorado State. Dr. Elaine Carnevale, who was one of the founders of OPU-ICSI, she's been working on this question for almost 20 years. And finally, they're at the point of actually having a commercial product that may help. So she looked at lots of things here of going, how do we help these mares' old oocytes? And we're going to jump to the results here. So this is let's go to this graph here. So this is a young mare, 10-year-old mare. These are the control mares, 48% blastocyst rate. That's what we're looking for, okay? So that's our target. If we look at it just an old mare by herself, she's around 20%. If you feed her just some sort of grain supplement, it actually makes things worse, okay? And then they came up with this series of different antioxidants and omega-3 fatty acids and fed it to older mares and got a similar blastocyst rate, actually a little bit higher than our young mares. So it seems like this product can actually reverse some of these alterations in oocyte metabolism to enhance fertility rates. It's not commercially available today. It's going to hopefully be available through Platinum this fall. We're one of the centers that's trying it for a breeding trial of, they have great data here to suggest this. Now they want to know more clinical questions. Let's use it in more mares and more clinical situations and what happens. And so they've identified 5 facilities across the United States that are using this as in problem mares to go and go like, what happens? How does it help? What conditions does it help in besides old oocytes and all those kinds of questions that need to come to bear before it actually is a sellable product. Do I need more mares? They haven't given me a top end yet, so sure. So this is kind of an interesting one here. You may have heard about it, a week-long semen extender, right? So it's out of Australia. This isn't a new concept, by the way. It's kind of being published as being new. The French INRA in the 1970s looked at doing this. And they actually found that you could actually do it back in the 1970s. And if you hold sperm at 15 degrees Celsius, which is just a little bit around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe. Good, some of the Europeans are nodding, so perfect. I got that calculation right. Back in the 70s, sperm would live for 4, 5, 6 days, and you could actually breed mares with those ejaculates and actually get pregnancies with them. The biggest, so if we look at another species that utilizes the same technology, pigs. This is how pig semen is shipped. It's shipped at 15 degrees Celsius, and it lasts for a week. So the big boar studs collect their boars once a week, make up the allocated doses, and ship it to the sows, and they have all their semen they need for a week. Okay. Now, why hasn't this technology went from the 70s of going, hey, this works, to now? Bacterial overgrowth. Okay. It's a huge problem in the boar industry as well. It's something like 10, 15% of their shipments have so much bacterial overgrowth, all the sperm are dead. Okay. So now this group has claimed that they have figured out how to overcome that. I'm still just a little skeptical. I want to see it get into clinical practice. Their data in a very tight-knit group looks very promising. I want to see this out in more practices and used a little bit more before I go, yeah, I think this is going to be a great idea. It is with horse semen. Correct. Correct. And so the really cool part about this was that for 14 days, almost 2 weeks at 5 degrees C, you can still get pregnancies. 7 days at 17 C. That means we can now ship cool chip semen internationally, right? So we have time to get through all the export and import requirements and actually get it delivered. Problems with FedEx shipping delays? Who has FedEx shipping delays? So potentially that could work into this.
Don't tell FedEx.
Now, I think it's interesting. I think we're all kind of struggling with, well, how do you use that, right? Like if you think the mare is really going to be ready on Wednesday, do you order on Monday and it gets here early? And then we've all had that mare that you think she's going to be ready Wednesday, but she's not ready for another 7 days. She switches follicles and it doesn't work out. So how is this good? Is it going to really benefit us or not? I don't know. Exactly. The other one that's not discussed in this is the expense of the shipping containers. If you're going to maintain 17C, that's relatively warm. It's going to have some sort of ability to heat and cool that semen and transport. So that is something, and just to tell you, because those are the same technology we use to ship the oocytes, they're $6,000 a piece.
Oh, come on.
Okay, so they are not cheap. These are my two kids. They're really the reason we got here to the Northwest, and happy to answer any other questions you have, or if you have other topics that I didn't touch on that you've heard in the industry, happy to answer those as well.
You mentioned the histamine are there other drugs that are that you can stay away from for fertility in both the mare and the stallion?
I will say this will not be a complete list. Okay, so we try to avoid some of our NSAIDs, specifically bute and banamine in the peri-ovulatory period. At least for banamine, 100% of the time. Bute, if we started it when they have a big follicle, it seems to increase our rate of anovulatory follicles. If they're on it chronically for a lameness issue, it doesn't seem to cause as much detriment. Other drugs such as Equiox that are available for as an NSAID don't seem to cause those same things. Trying to think of other big ones. Osphos is one that pops up, right? And so I can't think of what it is. Osphos in children, they're going to affect bone development. So we're going to want to watch those in our pregnant brood mares, and especially with bone development during the embryo development phase. It seems like if we flush embryos or oocytes out of those mares, it does not seem to affect the developing fetus. But just some things to keep. Those would be the couple things that pop into my head.
What about percent?
I think mares absolutely should be on percent.
Okay, but I mean, someone was telling me, well, that could be if we have an older mare that's coming in to do an EC, 20-year-old maiden, but another vet tried all last year. She's not really maiden. And then her owner, who's a small animal vet, wants to try again. And then she's like, well, she has to be on percent. And I'm like, that's fine. If she has Cushing's, she's going to need that. But then another vet told me, well, that can be bad during the breeding part. Like affects that, like I guess the ovulation or no?
I don't have any data per se, but I will say by a lot, mares that are 12 years and old that come in for being barren, we screen them for Cushing's. 30% of those mares will be positive. We put them on percent and usually embryos fall out of the sky.
And so it doesn't affect.
So I would be much more in the field of camp of if you have equine Cushing's disease that's diagnosed and whatnot, that mare needs to be on percent. And to give you an example, one of our oocyte donors that came in initially to us as a problem mare, we diagnosed her with equine Cushing's disease, put her on percent or Pergolide. She donated oocytes and had a great embryo recovery rate. She came back 6 months later for another session and we couldn't produce an embryo to save our lives. And we're talking to the trainers and everybody are going, what's different? And whatnot. They stopped giving the percent at home. So she only got percent for the 2 days she was here with us because we knew that she should be on percent. No. We were failing because we were only giving it she was getting it 2 days out of every 2 weeks. They put her back on percent full time and she's producing embryos regularly. So I do think percent is if indicated, is beneficial, not harmful.
I had a 14 years old. Ended up having Cushing's that tremendous fitness, except that he would not get full. He would tend to have a little more lactation. So, don't think that it has to be they have the curly toes or something else. Oh yeah. This can actually happen to 3 young mares and not 30 not.
The comment globally was is that she had a mare that was not showing the classic signs of equine Cushing's disease, but was just barren and tested positive for equine Cushing's disease, treated, and then was able to become pregnant or donate embryos, or I didn't catch, but was successful at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Several.
I don't think they work. The question is Philly plus or Colt plus.
Yeah.
I don't think they work. Me and several colleagues have asked for just give us some rudimentary of how, right? And we've never gotten a response from them. Right, 50% of the time it works. And I kind of use that somewhat analogy when sex semen came out in the bull industry 15, 20 years ago. There were unscrupulous salesmen that would go out and buy, they knew it was non-sex semen. But if you sold it for 250% of what you paid for it, you just offer a money back guarantee and you are still making 150% profit every day of the week.
Well, I was wondering, like, also
and I will say there is some other, so currently the state of sexing semen is via flow cytometry. So that is how it is done. There is a group out of Chile, I believe, or at least in South America, that is looking at magnetic particles, that they've identified some that can actually bind to the sperm, and then you actually put a magnet at the bottom of the container, and it sucks the sex that you don't want out of solution. And then you basically just pour off the supernate, and that has the sex you want. It's not, I want to see some bigger numbers in their studies, because right now it's only about a 65, 70% sex of interest rate. But if it works, I mean, that's still pretty cool and relatively inexpensive and easy to do. But I would like to see that scaled up. Right now they have 20, 30 pregnancies that they've done this with. I'd like to see that scaled up to a couple hundred to see if that percentage stays true, because all of us have had those foaling seasons where you foal out 20 mares and you get 19 colts. What the heck? And then next year it's 10 and 10, and the year after you get all fillies. So somewhat I'm a little skeptical on that variation of, is it real?
Did you find that they used to say if using frozen, if you breed close to ovulation, you'll get a colt and later. You ever find that? Because they're quicker.
Yeah, the question is of the time that you actually breed the mare and whether you get a colt or a filly. I've had people tell me both ways, so I'm kind of a little skeptical on that as well, right? You know, I mean, I've had people insist that you got to breed her pre-ovulation because then you get colts, and I've had people come in, you got to breed post-ovulation because then you get colts, and I'm like, but that guy just said the exact opposite. So I don't think that there's a rhyme or reason.
I'm just curious of your opinion on this. We had a mare, we had her tight. She had 9, she used to put over the span of her 20-year breeding career. She had 9 fillies in a row. And exclusively fillies. And her last fall, she was older, she was what, 21, 22? It was a colt. It was aborted about a month before it was due, stillborn. That was the only colt that got. Do you think there's anything to that, or is it just
All different stallions.
all different styles? Was it flipping a coin 9 times to get heads every time?
That's typically what it is. So the weird part with this brings up statistical calculations and whatnot, right? So if you compare two percentages and go, well, we have 1,000 horses and the incidence is 60% colts versus 40% females. If you just do the calculations on that, that'll probably come out statistically different. But really what that's for, and that's what most studies do. I've been guilty of making this mistake until I was corrected by a statistician. The problem is you should use a background rate of 50-50 as the expected, right? So then that means that you need extreme numbers. So if you look at the dairy industry, DHIA has been keeping track of bulls and heifers for something like almost 100 years. And I believe it's coming up here where they're actually going to be able to say statistically with all of the millions of cows who have freshened and they have records, because right now the rate's sitting at like 54% bulls, well, before sex semen came along, but there was a elevation in the number of bulls born versus heifers. But it took hundreds of thousands of cows to actually say if that 4% difference was real. So it's, you'd love for debate to say like, yeah, that's really cool, but it literally just comes down to just a coin flip. And if you look at, if you do some of these things, like there's some, these are the things some of us veterinarians do for fun because we think it's cool, right? If you do like, you can go online and there's some calculators of like coin flip things. And you can go, okay, if you flipped a coin 100 times and you had 100 people flipping a coin, what would be the variances out there, right? Well, somebody's going to get 100 times heads and somebody's going to get 100 times tails. But when you look at the average, it's 50-50. But the scattering out there, you get some really weird swings that make you think, oh, wow, something is rigged with that. But it's not.
That's everybody. Yeah, just confirm it. And you have to block the over, you know, how do you clean them?
I'll give you a little bit of the historical stuff first. So used to midline surgery, pull the oviduct out and actually flush it. That moved into laparoscopic surgery and putting PGE2 gel on the oviduct to relieve it. And then recently that's moved to application of misoprostol, which is another synthetic PGE analog, on the uteral tubule junction, which is where we would deposit frozen semen. So you use it with just a deep horn insemination pipette. So that's why it's being blown out of proportion. It went from being a $5,000 procedure. The PGE2 for the laparoscopic procedure was literally $2,500 a piece hard cost, to now being $100.
Yeah.
And so that's why everybody is way over treating them because we're all going like, why not?
I have a match. I have already this everything.
Have you ever got an embryo ever?
Yeah, I got embryo.
Have you biopsied her?
Get pregnant. And I said, you know what, let's do embryo test. I got 2 embryos on my embryo. I have 2 exposed, and then next year I try to get embryo test.
Have you biopsied her? Biopsy?
That was the biopsy, everything.
And it looks normal?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, nothing.
Where I was going with his history is that it's a mare that isn't getting pregnant to carry, but is donating embryos. I have seen a small subset of mares in my career that they do not have normal endometrial tissue. And so you can get them pregnant, you can get embryos out of them because that uterus is capable of supporting that embryo for just a couple days, but their uterus isn't capable of supporting that pregnancy beyond that point. And then I have a mare that's very similar to your story right now. The owner would pay any ungodly amount that I could recommend for testing and would have no problem with it if we could get this mare to carry. And I can't figure out what's wrong with her, but I have bred her 6 times. She has slow embryonic development. You actually don't know if she's pregnant until about 18 days in full or post-ovulation. She shows up with this little tiny 2-millimeter structure and it never gets a heartbeat. But I can flush embryos out of her all day long and they become pregnant in the recipient normally. We just did OPU with her and they have 1 pregnancy and 3 frozen embryos. Like there has to be something in her uterus that is not allowing a pregnancy to continue developing.
Yeah, I don't even, I could have but yeah, they don't have it.
Dan.
Yeah, reproductively in humans, same male, same female. If they have 2 same genders, the chances of same gender the next time is above 80%. I don't remember what it was, and I read a few legitimate articles on this. It's the same science, same there. Is there any evidence that would show that cross would bring out extra high chances of the same sex, of the same gender of holding the forth?
You're kind of comparing apples to potatoes or something. And I only say that because in the horse, we do so much manipulation, right? Nothing is natural. You can argue the same thing for humans over here, but that is a completely different breeding scenario where we are selecting sperm, we're freezing it, we're augmenting it, we're doing all of this stuff. And how is that potentially changing sex ratios? And I don't think anyone has enough data to actually try to say whether one is better or not or different. And I know the quarter horse industry has been trying to look at some of those things, and they don't have enough numbers to really say either what's going on.
Now, I have one male basically has +1 embryo, 1 cycle. Same time I use the next cycle till the end call.
Yeah, as We had same, map, always the same vendor.
Yeah, mine is different.
So I'm just curious, that is, if there's something, chemically or between that, those two. Oocyte that they're, that's not.
People have, the theory behind it, Dan, is that every mare's oviduct is going to be a little bit different in how they support sperm, right? So the sperm actually have to get to the oviduct. So that's a little bit of a race. So the mare naturally selects out 99.9% of the sperm, and it never gets into the oviduct in the first place. Then that mare's oviduct is responsible for culturing and nurturing those sperm cells until that oocyte arrives, and having them at a point where they can actually undergo capacitation and bind to the zona and actually accomplish fertilization. So that's what everybody's been wondering is, could there be a population of horses out there that can select more for X or Y bearing sperm, but we just don't know. I mean, theoretically, it's a question. I definitely think that there are mares out there that are more fertile than others, right? Like based on that, based on the quality of their oviduct and stuff, but I don't know.
How do you grow the oocyte?
How do you grow them?
Yeah, when you take them, when they're still not ready yet. What is to mature them?
To mature them, it's a whole list of hormones that we provide them that are very similar to what the follicle produces itself to actually initiate maturation and final readiness for fertilization. Shannon, there was a question back here. I'm going to get to her before you. He's a prostate side attack. Yep.
So would you produce it with something like metal at the same time to prevent a bacterial infection? Would that work, or is that not going to be good?
So the question is should we use settle or something like that to prevent an infection? I think how I look at it is that infection is already there. And so I want to know what's there before we treat it. So that way I know what I'm treating. Okay. So I don't want to kill it. I don't want to treat it and kill it at the same time, because I really want to know what's in that mare's uterus. So that way our treatment program matches that. So I guess I would give the misoprostol, then culture the mare, find out what I'm treating, and then treat it appropriately. And I guess maybe I'm unique in that if you grow a beta hemolytic strep from your uterus, I'm going to treat you one way. If you grow Pseudomonas, you're going to get a completely different treatment. If you grow E. coli twice, you're going to get a completely different scenario of treatments. So I kind of try to specialize what is happening in that horse to the treatment she gets, not just every bacteria gets the same treatment.
Mine is along the lines of infection. Have you noticed any correlation when you flush two embryos from a regular ET to some infection? For some reason, every single one that I can think of has always been to the same gender. Okay.
I haven't. Yeah, I haven't observed that phenomenon per se. Yep. And that's just because of the fact that monozygotic twins, true splitting of embryos doesn't happen routinely in the horse. So when we get twins, it's from two distinct ovulations. So each one of those has a 50-50 chance of being a colt or a filly. What about our colleagues from the EU? I want to learn something. What's anything new or different over there that you guys are doing that we're not doing here? We have the same situation of I don't think this year is going to be as bad. I worry about next year for recipients because the number of stockpiled frozen embryos, we're not even going to use what was frozen last year this year. And then we're just increasing that bank this year, and next year we're going, holy smokes, what do you do with that? Because literally the recipient herds are basically being dropped off hundreds of embryos and going, any available uterus is not lined up for an in vivo flush, just put an embryo in. Like, you can put in as many as you want from this state to this state.
I think the next thing would be that we develop an artificial mare and just
Oh my gosh.
That would be a different level of science, but yeah, no.
Piece of matrix level.
Hundreds and thousands of little auctions all across the US and once they're in them. Going to kill buyers, you contract with the kill buyers to buy bears.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a huge overpopulation problem.
So from having run recipient herds, 90% of the horses going through that auction don't qualify to be a recipient. Right? So I want you to be 4 to 12 years of age. I want you to have a good breeding history, which we're not going to get any, right? That's why that mare's probably in that auction, is somebody probably tried to breed her, or she was a recipient somewhere else and couldn't get pregnant and got dumped. So honestly, it's where we get a lot of horses from. But I mean, when I was at Colorado State, we would screen those mares heavily, biopsies, uterine cultures, cytologies, and whatnot before putting embryos in them, trying to do as much due diligence as we could to say that mare's uterus is as pristine and normal as we can guess. Yep, a lot of them do. One of our recipient providers out of California, she gets a lot of mares off the track, and they work beautifully as recipients. In some ways, I like them better than a lot of the other places. They're thoroughbreds, which they have their own issues and whatnot, but they're halterable. They're used to getting their feet trimmed. They have some issues with keeping weight on them and stuff like that, but you know, in a lot of ways, they make great recipient mares. Standard breds are wonderful for recipient mares, old standard bred racehorses. Question up here?
With the, if you breed the embryo in like a 53 horse, it's going to affect the growth.
So question is size of the recipient and matching with the donor. I like them to be within a hand size of the donor, ideally. Okay. Now, if we look at some extreme things of like putting pony embryos in draft horses and draft horse embryos in ponies, they all catch up to their genetic equivalents and whatnot. But there's some interesting information coming out of France, and we're just learning this data, right? Like we all see a huge increase in equine metabolic syndrome in all of our horses, right? And they're looking at the in utero effects on the fetus resulting in equine metabolic syndrome down the road. So interestingly, when you take big donors and put them in small recips, it's still too early. These horses aren't old enough to really start showing signs of equine metabolic syndrome. But if you look at their glucose utilization and insulin rates and whatnot, they're skewed from a embryo that was from a normal sized donor into a normal similar sized recipient. So I do think some of these things are going to come out in the future that maybe we should be a little bit more selective, but I try to match them up size wise by size wise as much as you can. There's definitely a theme in the standard bred world. If you put a trotter embryo and I can't remember if it's a trotter and a pacer and a trotter, the foal's going to come out with the wrong gait.
At schools where that means, put a dressage foal with a dressage foal. You know, you probably was going to think that dressage foal is going to move like a dressage.
Excuse me, how much is the recipient mare? Do you have to pay to lose the recipient mare in the US now?
It's all over the board.
I'm just wondering for breeders who are trying to make money, instead of breeding your own baby that you barely make money on anyways, if someone else puts a baby in your mare, you have no stud fee, no vet bills, they pay board on that, plus they pay you a fee. I mean, you could be $7,000 or $8,000 ahead by the time that foal is born. And how many of us make that much money on a foal?
Right. What I'm saying, should we go second
So two serious comments on that. I do have a colleague in Oklahoma who is taking his, so usually the general theme is a recipient gets 2 at max 3 chances to become pregnant with an embryo, and if you don't become pregnant, you're out. So there's this cull rate of about 10% of recipients every year. And so there's a veterinarian in Oklahoma that has a large recipient herd. He's turning those mares out with just any random stallion, just going like, can I get you pregnant? Because partly he's kind of going like, if I can get you pregnant that way, maybe you can come back and be a recipient in the future. Secondly, he's going, well, half those resulting foals born are going to be fillies. So I'll just raise them up and put embryos in them then, because I'm paying a bucket load of money right now for potential garbage. And at least I know that that horse has a clean history and all of that.
In Europe, it's 3,000 euros for the land. So then you have to give it back. Like,
Yeah.
so you're leasing her basically for a year. They have to completely do all the that's maintenance and everything. Then you
Yeah,
give it back.
well.
Had that happen, we had a recipient there died the day before she was going back to. We only paid a third of what. It's understandable.
Now, you bring up the economics of it, and I've had some clients do some unique things throughout their career. So maybe to share 2 quick stories. One client that kept track of everything, he kept track of every single cost. Even if the horse was with him, he had a board rate that he charged himself and whatnot. And he kept track of sale prices of his foals, and he didn't care what he paid for that donor. If you weren't making money, you were out. And he was very strict on it in that standpoint, right? You know, so I think being cognizant of what are you breeding and are you generating money? And if you're not, stop, at least with that mare. Another client who did a very unique thing was he would breed his young horses twice the carry to get foals on the ground. Then that mare would become a recipient mare for his proven donors until he saw what those 2 resulting foals were. And if they entered training and did well, he would then move that mare either to breeding to carry herself or maybe be her own embryo transfer donor. But he's like, 50% of my horses aren't worth breeding. But I know them, they fit in my program, they've been around, like they work well in all my fields, like they're easy to turn out, all of that. I'm just going to use them as my own recipients.
You recommend that, for someone who wants to do this, maybe get their own recipient? And if they do get maybe a couple of mares, or is that harder?
It depends. If it's in that situation where you already have the horse and you know it, and you know her history and you know what's happened to her, yes, I think it makes sense. Going out to the local auction and going, ooh, that one sold cheap. I don't like that, right? Like you're going after something that isn't a known entity as well. And then you're adding another mouth to feed, and who knows if that mare is going to ever line up with your donors and everything else. And then at the end of the season, we still may end up shipping that embryo out because your recipient didn't work out with that donor. And then not only did you feed that horse for 6 months, so you got that expense to add in, but you still didn't use her uterus. So I think, at the end of the day, it kind of depends on each individual program, but, I don't love the idea of going out and buying a bunch of horses. If you have them, I think it can work well, but going out and searching for that mysterious recipient, I don't know if that's a great idea.
By having embryo flow, that's basically the chance of getting it implanted almost as good as the fresh embryo. Right now, these days, they're pretty much lining up in the same way. The frozen embryo to the fresh embryo, the get it implanted and viable.
So the question that was just asked was about frozen embryos versus fresh embryos. So 2 distinct embryo sources here. So embryos flushed out of the uterus, 80% transfer success rate with a fresh embryo, 60-65% frozen. Okay. OPU or ICSI generated embryos. Fresh transfer success rate, 78, almost 80%. And I'm going to focus on day 7 or 8 embryos here, because otherwise it just starts becoming a whole smattering of discussions. If you freeze those embryos and go to transfer them, you're looking 75% transfer success rate. So a little lower, but not bad. Not the same loss rates that we see with an in vivo flushed embryo. And partly that's explained by the fact that the horse embryo, unlike other species, expands quite rapidly when it hits the uterus. And it's that large size that makes it hard to actually freeze. It's removing all the water out of the blastocecal cavity or out of that structure to allow it to be frozen. So smaller structures freeze easier. So that's why cattle embryos stay small right up until they hatch. And those embryos freeze extremely well. The ICSI-derived embryos freeze extremely well because they can look at them in the laboratory, and as soon as they're ready to be frozen, freeze it. Where I'm having to take an educated guess of when the best day is to flush your mare to freeze that embryo and hope that it's small. And if it's too big, I'm stuck.
And also there's another process involved too, special market, go to the filter and all that stuff. There's so many more processes to get with them. So you have the other ones in the glass basically.
Well, there's something like 280 steps in vitro fertilization in humans that if you screw up one of those, everything fails. So I won't say that the ICSI side of things in the horse is exactly easier or less stressful than those little structures either.
But Brian Ferris, we want to thank you a lot for sharing this great story, reproduction story, the future, and what's in the pipeline. Very interesting, special right ahead of the breeding season. Everybody's looking for breeding season. Watching foals coming. So yeah, I mean, I think this area is very spoiled having you in this area. So if you ever consider moving, we find it basically next to.
Went on to Dr. Ferris did a webinar with us a couple months ago about neonatal ISO. Where the calls were neonatal.
That wasn't him. That was not him. No, Brian Ferris didn't do it. It was a guy from UC Davis. That's his.
John Madigan?
What?
John Madigan?
Yeah.
Or McGee's?
No, not Madigan.
McGee's?
No, but I don't remember, but it wasn't Dr.
Yes.
Ferris.
I loosely know what neonatal isoarthrolysis is and how to manage it and whatnot, but that wasn't me.
If you're in the.
Program last year.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
On our website, but it was very interesting. But
We don't want to leave you empty hands.
yeah.
So thanks again. Thanks for bringing the family.
We have lunch.
We also have. Yeah, so now we're gonna grab our lunch party. Kelly and Drew have them ready so we can eat it here. And also on the way to Sonneberg. Dan likes to get started at 1 o'clock sharp. We got a very interesting afternoon program scheduled at his place with some really good horses. We're gonna do some Ibok mares and some Liberty. So we're really looking forward to this afternoon. One more person I want to have here to the front, Janko. Janko is leaving this afternoon. Supportive of us all the time. We want to thank you for all of his support for the NA organization. So it was snowing in the Netherlands, so we better make sure coming out of Florida for 3 weeks. So thank you a lot, Janko, and yeah, safe travels back home, and hopefully see you in future.
Very much, and have a good breeding season.